What is up, guys? Strap yourselves in. We got ourselves a 2-hour MLB live before lock for both the early slate and the main slate here. So we are going to do a little bit of everything that you need to know for the MLB DFS world today. And I'm Chris Spags, joined by a man I am always in the MLB streets with, the MLB fields with. I don't know. You can call him Nerd Ass Greg. He's Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
Yeah, pretty good. And we've got two MLB slates today. So we're doing two live before lock. So this one's actually live before lock. The other one is live before lock, but not actually right before lock. So it's it's live after lock, but it's good. It's going to be covering the later slate of games. We're covering the early slate. So we have both of them covered today.
Yeah, a little bit of something for everybody here. If you're playing MLB DFS today, 5-gamer for the early slate. This FanDuel doesn't sneak another game in there, right? I feel like it's still a 5-gamer over there.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I only made lineups on DraftKings. It's
impossible to keep up with everything.
I only made lineups on DraftKings for this slate. But I made or only upload lineups. I have a dummy build for FanDuel just so I kind of be like, hey, these are the players who I would generally be rostering if I was playing on FanDuel. But yeah, it's just a 5-game slate on FanDuel as well for the early.
Yeah, so then we will be having, again, a main slate live before lock coming up after this show with Alex, Terry, and Max, 3 p.m. Eastern on this stream. So stay on this link when we finish up with our early live before lock. But also, a big part of the MLB process is going to be making sure that you have access to all the great Awesemo Plus tools and content for every, nearly every DFS sport out there. At this point, I'd say every DFS sport out there. With an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95, it includes full access to all the premium content and tools on Awesemo, including player projections, ownership projections, premium Slack, the lineup builder, and much more, including things like the top stacks tool and top pitchers tool for MLB. We also have a special MMA deal running for UFC 261, Usman versus Masvidal on April 24th. Get 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus MMA when you use the promo code UFC 261 at awesemo.com/join. $14.98 for 30 days of Awesemo Plus MMA, which includes the fighter projections, ownership projections, and our top fighters tool that compares projected ownership with the chances of any of the fighters being a top fighter. This offer is valid through this Saturday for that Usman fight. So stop guessing, start winning, join Awesemo Plus today. And also make sure to check out OddsShopper.awesemo.com. Lots of bets are going to be looking good on there. We talk a lot about the biggest bat, the biggest arm, the home run, and strikeout props that are a lot of fun to be playing every single day. OddsShopper has the best odds for you if you're playing some MLB DFS. You don't get enough exposure to a guy like Dinelson Lamet today. Get some exposure on your bets. Get some prop bets going at OddsShopper.awesemo.com. Real-time lines on there are going to give you the best value you can find on any of the legal books out there. So go OddsShopper.awesemo.com. Greg, any overarching thoughts here? We got a slate with a Coors game, and that's going to be, I think, a particularly sticky wicket to dig through on a 5-gamer where lots of ownership going there. But I guess any overarching views before we go game by game, talk about all the hitting and all the pitching?
Yes, so you mentioned Dinelson Lamet there. He's projected to be really popular on the slate, and to an extent, I understand why. It's a short slate. There aren't a lot of very many good pitching options, but Lamet's also coming off an elbow injury, and he hasn't pitched all year, so I'm really struggling to know what to make of Dinelson Lamet. I don't know how deep he's going to work into the game today. I don't know if it's got, if he scores 15 DraftKings points and most of the other pitching options other than Max Scherzer suck, then maybe that'll be enough for him to make the optimal anyway. But he's somebody I'm really struggling with, and I've updated my lineups probably 20 times over the last hour, and it's just adjusting Lamet exposure to figure out something I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, there is a healthy projection on Lamet from Awesemo today, and certainly Awesemo, the data team that we have at Awesemo, always looking at every possible factor you can. And I think it's going to be hard to ignore on an optimizer, but you may be like Greg, trying to optimize as best you can your actual exposure for Lamet. And we'll talk about that here on the slate. But make sure you guys hit that like button here, both for this show and the main slate live before lock coming on right after us. And I guess it's time to just get into our main event of the evening with the first game on the slate. Houston, 5.4 implied runs total, going against Austin Gomber, a lefty who's not pitched very deep into games, but for the most part has avoided damage, I think, pretty well. A 1% home run rate in the 184 batters he's faced over the last season and change. The power numbers for him also not that bad. It's, he's going to be in Coors, so those numbers are certainly going to take a jump upwards. But Greg, give me your thoughts on Gomber here. I'm going to assume he's not a guy you want to play much of, given the fact that he hasn't necessarily pitched the deepest in the games, and his stuff is not the best. Strikeout rate under league average, 22.3% for him. But Gomber, what do you think of him here? Even if he's not a play, do you have any thoughts on him and his, propensity to get blown up in this spot at Coors?
It's a Coors Field game. I was very heavy on the Astros yesterday. That went poorly. They did not score very many runs. They lost the game by a lot. But today I have to rely once again on the top stacks tool. And we have the Astros as the team projected to score the most runs on the slate by a pretty wide margin. Houston is projecting for a 25.5% chance of being the top scoring team. On Fanduel, they're actually going a little bit under-owned with a 22% ownership share. And then on DraftKings, slightly over-owned with a 28% ownership share. But either way, to me, I think this has to be my most rostered team. There's other teams I'm going to have more leverage on, but I'm right around the field with Houston today. Like you said, Austin Gomber, not one of the premier pitchers in baseball. And then also just a really bad makeup for somebody who would potentially succeed in Coors Field. Like at least somebody who's capable of generating swing and misses, a high strikeout guy. You could reason yourself into like, hey, if Jacob deGrom is going to strike out 14 guys at Coors Field, doesn't matter how much the ball flies because nobody's making contact. And Austin Gomber is not that guy.
Yeah, Austin Gomber, 9% swing strike rate, a 27% chase rate, both not the best numbers to say the least here. And really his main ability in the majors so far has been just not getting banged up too hard, only a 1.1% on run rate. But I think a lot of that, he was in St. Louis last year, right? I don't want to always make everything back to the Cardinals, but I feel like that was who he played for before Colorado.
Yeah, he was with St. Louis. And then also, even if we look at some of his numbers from last year, I'm pretty sure he pitched a lot of it out of the bullpen. So when you're looking at somebody bullpen versus starter stats, you would expect their numbers to be better when they're pitching out of bullpen than when they're a starter. So 14 appearances for Gomber last year, 4 starts and 10 out of the bullpen. So even looking at some of those strikeout numbers where he struck out, 8.36 hitters per 9 innings, I think it's reasonable to think that was probably even a little bit inflated because a lot of that came out of the bullpen.
Yeah, no, I think that's reasonable to say. And some of what Greg's talking about here last year or going back to last year has had a 26.8% strikeout rate versus righties compared to just a 12%er versus lefties. Gomber's numbers are just bizarre to look at because it seems like a guy who's teetering on the brink of having some bad days. Maybe this is the day that it happens, but he has sort of avoided any of the big blowups, I think, for the most part, when you're looking at the longer term sample size or about as long of a term sample size you can get for a guy who's mostly pitched over the last season. It does seem like Gomber, not the worst on paper, but these kind of days are ones you could blow it up. And let's just dig into Houston here because as Greg mentioned, they are going to be the top probability stack by a very wide margin today. And the ownership also going to be there by a very wide margin above all the other stacks. And you have a team that disappointed yesterday, but you have so many hitters here who look fantastic. In the chat, somebody was just saying that Alex Bregman mashes lefties. He does a 360 ISO going back to 2019 against lefties. That is what Gomber is. So that's one thing to note here. The rest of the team though, Greg, I feel like not anybody who really jumps out is destroying lefties in a meaningful way. I guess Yuli Gurriel is one other player who maybe stands out, though he's been down a little bit over the last season. I could see maybe you can point some holes or poke some holes in his game, but a 247 ISO for him against lefties. I think you have to stack Houston a bit, but I might be inclined to try the 3-man stack just to see if you can get away and capture that production. But what are you doing with Houston? Are you just taking 5-man stacks, just trying to get as many different configurations as possible? Are you taking the chalk here? How are you handling it? Because it is a 5-game slate, and this is clearly the spot that it looks like you have to target if you're going to trust the data.
Yeah, so this is my most used 5-man stack. It's also my most 3-man stack. It's my most used 2-man stack. It doesn't mean that they're in 100% of my lineups, but a lot of my lineups have at least some exposure to Houston players in there. And then looking at some of the individual guys, Bregman, who's an extremely popular play on the slate. But even so, I mean, we're looking at a fairly small slate. It's not really a loaded third base position. So Alex Bregman is still somebody who I'm getting a ton of exposure to. And right around even with the field, even though he's really popular on DraftKings. One thing that is weird about this team, or at least was yesterday, they were ridiculously cheap. Like the team was priced as if they weren't playing at Coors Field. That's generally not the case today. Bregman's priced up, Correa's priced up, Brantley's priced out. But one really strong value play is Chris McCormick is leading off. I don't really know why that's the case. Not somebody, if you asked me to project the starting lineup, I never would have said the Astros leading leadoff hitter would be Chris McCormick. But
Chaz, don't disrespect Chaz.
Oh, my bad, Chaz McCormick.
He's much cooler when he's Chaz McCormick than no disrespect to fellow Chris's, but Chaz McCormick, come on, that's an 80s guy who'd be like a friend of Charles in Charge.
He told me to call him Chase. I mean, whatever. I mean, we're close like that. But I think also if you just look at what his price point is because of the and how good a value is because of the unexpected spot in the lineup. But you get somebody who's that cheap playing Coors Field leading off. He's a good value play. Mlb Dfs, who's hitting 7th, but he's relatively cheap in both Fanduel and DraftKings. Also multiple position eligibility on DK. I think that he makes for a good value play. So I think there are cheap guys to mix it in to make it so that the Astros aren't just egregiously expensive throughout the roster. And the other thing too is other than, Max Scherzer, who's kind of cheaper than he normally is, there aren't really other pitchers on the slate I really feel good about. So I think I'm going to be going cheap at pitching a lot behind Scherzer.
Yeah. Okay. That seems like a reasonable approach here. And if you had to prioritize one Astro, I guess, people always want to try to focus in on one guy. Obviously, it being Coors, the production can come from anybody. It wouldn't even be shocking to see a guy like Michael Brantley get some results here, even in the lefty on lefty spot. It's just that's what, Coors can be, just volatile as can be in a good way for the hitters, usually, especially the hitters who don't necessarily have a ton of power. But are you prioritizing Bregman here? Because the ownership for him is onerous, I would say, to get to. We've seen guys like Mike Trout recently fail at similar ownership. And it's not, a symptom of Mike Trout being bad. Obviously, he's a fantastic player. Same thing with Bregman yesterday too. But he's it's so much ownership where you're expecting this guy based on the ownership on DraftKings. He's 45% owned. You have to think he has at least a 45% probability of success then if you're getting there. So are you going to be over the field on guys like Bregman, or is there somebody else who stands out as a priority?
McCormick, I said before, mentioned him. Apologize to the McCormick family because I called him Chase instead of Chaz. But
you called him Chris.
Oh, now you call him Chris? Whatever. I'm calling him all different things. He's a man of many names. He's a man evolves. He changes. But yeah. So I think with McCormick though, it's just because of where he's hitting leadoff and the price is so cheap that's just something that's always going to stand out to me when somebody is in a lineup so I weren't expecting. So with McCormick, if he was leading off, say, yesterday, and we knew ahead of time he was going to be leading off, say, like he probably wouldn't have priced up to, like 4,500 or something like that on DraftKings. And then on Fanduel, he probably would have been somebody who's like 3,800 or something like that. So I think we're just looking at somebody who's a really good value because of the spot in the batting order.
McCormick has not faced very many lefties in the majors, but overall over the last season, he has had a 357 ISO, not the biggest sample size there, but has shown some power. So the Chaz McCormick against the Virgin Austin Gomber, I guess, would be the meme approach that we have for this one. Any interest in the bottom of the order, guys? I feel like I just want to make sure we cover this as best we can because Yuli Gurriel, guy I mentioned, is going to be the most unowned guy on DraftKings, 14% for him. You do have Martin Maldonado, who's going to be pretty decently owned. Usually the catcher stacked up, never going to be something you have too much of a gripe with, but a lot of ownership going to Maldonado, a lot of ownership going to Mlb Dfs as well in the 7 hole for him. Is there anybody, I guess, at this bottom order that you think is worth prioritizing or using in a wraparound stack or just ignoring entirely? Because that is a lot of ownership going to Maldonado, given the fact that he has not hit lefties that well, though he's been competent and he's playing in Coors.
Yeah, so, I would like to say here's the low-owned Houston player that you roster differentiate, but there is none, right? If you look at the ownerships, at least on DraftKings going down, you mentioned Gurriel's the least popular. He's still 13.5% owned. And the next least popular player in the lineup is Brantley at 24% and Diaz at 24%. So all of them are popular. There's no one real contrarian play in the Houston Astros lineup. So Bregman, I'm about even the field. Same with Maldonado. I'm actually kind of underweight to a bunch of the other guys just because the ownership is so high. But still, like I have McCormick in 25% of my lineups. That's a pretty significant chunk, but he's projecting for 38% ownership right now. So I have a lot of exposure to these guys. I think a lot individually, though, just based on what the ownership projections are, it looks like there's a pretty decent chance I'm going to be underweight to a lot of them.
Okay, that's reasonable. And Gurriel just stands out again, as Greg mentioned, 13.5% ownership on DK. He does have that pop that I mentioned, only a 7% strikeout rate against lefties as well. So he's seeing them pretty well. I think that's something that this lineup is really well equipped to hit lefties. Only one guy who strikes out above league average in that lineup, and that's Maldonado at the catcher spot. So definitely a lot of ways here. They can either bomb away on Gomber or they can death by 1,000 cuts, but there's definitely some ways for Houston to get production, even if you are a little afraid after they underperformed yesterday. Anybody, I guess, well, let's just go to Colorado here. We have Jose Urquidy going against them. Urquidy's swing and miss stuff has really fallen off of a cliff since his early run in the majors. Going back to last season, he was down to a 19.8% K rate. If you go back to 2019, a 21.8% K rate, but still under league average, which is about 23%. How are you feeling about Urquidy here? And would you have any exposure to him? Like the 8K price tag, not the best projection. I can see maybe getting a few one-offs of him if you're playing a bunch of lineups, but I have a lot of faith in Urquidy finding his strikeout stuff in this spot in Coors.
Yeah, so the Rockies are an interesting team because I view them much differently on DraftKings versus Fanduel per our top stacks tool, because on DraftKings, and by the way, obviously the odds of a team being the top scoring team on Slate is roughly the same across Fanduel and DraftKings. So we're looking at a team 11% chance being the top scoring team on the slate, but on Fanduel, where they're much more expensive, they're only picking up an 8% ownership share. DraftKings a 14% ownership share. So I'm pretty underweight to the field on DraftKings to the Rockies. And like I said before, I'm only playing lineups on DraftKings for the slate. But if I was playing lineups on FanDuel, I think the Rockies look like a really good pay up to be contrarian option. I mean, a team that, like I said, we have the third best odds being the top scoring team on the slate, but they're picking up very low ownership. And it's because the prices are so high. So, I mean, it's still a Coors Field game. Jose Urquidy has had some success in the big leagues, but it's not like he's some ace caliber starting pitcher. And it would not surprise me at all if he gives up a bunch of runs at Coors Field. So, given how low the ownership is on the Rockies on FanDuel, I think that would be a team to be to prioritize getting overweight to the field on.
Yeah, on DraftKings, as Greg mentioned, there's going to be a lot of ownership, though it does seem like Colorado going to be more popular. It's a three-man stack of Tapia with Trevor Story and CJ Cron. It seems all those guys over 19% ownership. Trevor Story being the high man at 28%, no pun intended, after yesterday's glorious holiday. And hope you all are feeling good about yourselves today and not too foggy after whatever indulgences you may have had for yourselves. But Trevor Story here, clearly going to be the marquee play on this team. I would say not quite as good as Alex Bregman based on the numbers, but to me, he does grade out as the Alex Bregman of the Colorado side of the equation. And Charlie Blackmon, too, has gotten enough decent results against righties that I don't hate him. But what are the priority plays for you on Colorado? And I guess given what you mentioned on FanDuel versus DraftKings, is it different on FanDuel versus DraftKings? Which guys you're prioritizing?
Yeah, so I mean, this would kind of apply to both sites, but Raimel Tapia, at least relative to his, actually he's cheap on both sites, 2,900 on DraftKings, and then on FanDuel he's only 3,200. So I think that he's somebody who, even though he's picking up ownership in the teens, I think that he's somebody worth being overweight to the field on. Somebody we've seen with a little bit of power, could also steal bases, and then he's playing at Coors Field. So I think that's one of the stronger plays overall here. Beyond him, at least specific to FanDuel, I think that, we just got the Padres lineup officially. Oh. I'll check out that in a second. Ryan McMahon, who does have a 3-homer game so far this year, just because there's so much power there and so much upside, he is actually the most expensive player in the Rockies lineup on FanDuel, but that's also lowering his ownership by a good amount. But that's another spot where I think that's somebody who makes sense to pay up to be contrarian with in terms of a Rocky stack on FanDuel, just because there's such significant upside and whenever he's playing at home at Coors.
Also, no Jake Cronenworth in that Padres lineup. So just in case anybody had him in or had him featured prominently in your lineups, he's sitting out today in that Padres lineup. And I guess we can just say it real fast here. Trent Grisham, Fernando Tatis, Manny Machado, Eric Hosmer, Jurickson Profar, Tommy Pham, Ha-Seong Kim, Victor Caratini, and then Dinelson Lamet in the 9-hole. It will be the Padres lineup that just got confirmed that Greg mentioned. So update accordingly. And let's see. Anything else on Colorado that stands out meaningfully to you? I feel like Dom Nunez, one guy in a limited sample, has hit righties with some degree of power, 7% home run rate. I don't mind taking a stab at him at 3,400 and filling that catcher spot on DK. But I guess, are there any lower owned Jonathan Daza, excuse me, another guy who's going to be under owned on DK? Any of the sub 10% Colorado guys, I guess, besides Ryan McMahon, who also is going to be under 9% owned? Greg already extolled the virtues of him. Any of these guys jump out as being more of a priority, or I guess a low owned play that you can really get to and want to get above the field on?
So Dom Nunez, you mentioned his name, him just being single-digit ownership, and you compare, like, what's the upside of Dom Nunez versus Martin Maldonado? Is like Maldonado really like 4x more likely to be in the optimal lineup over Nunez? Probably not, right? They're both cheap catchers playing at Coors Field, so I have kind of even exposure to two of them. Nunez is a little more expensive, so it's a little bit easier to get to Maldonado. But even so, I'm overweight to the field on Nunez. I think he's one of the top catcher options for GPPs on DraftKings today. FanDuel, I don't really think there's any need to roster a catcher, but Nunez on DraftKings, since we have to roster one, I think that he's going a little bit under-owned, whereas Maldonado maybe a little bit over-owned.
Okay. Yeah, I think that seems fair, and I would be on the same page there. Nunez, not quite as good of a projection, but honestly not that far off, that I do think that's one way to shave away some ownership and pay $300 more. So you're paying up a little bit there to be contrarian, but saving about 23% ownership on DK. Obviously on FanDuel, not as much of a play you need because you don't have to play the catchers on there. Anything else in this game for you? Do you want to move on to the next one with Minnesota and Oakland?
No, we can move on. Definitely no interest in the pitchers for me.
All right, so next game up, and guys, smash that like button here. As I mentioned earlier in the show, if you're just tuning in, we are doing a double stream here. We're doing the early slate, and then coming up after us, they'll be going game by game on MLB Live Before Lock for the main slate. So you're getting double the Live Before Lock, and that show coming up is going to have Terry, Alex, and Max doing the best they can to walk you through everything. So you're hearing from the best player in the world, and also Terry and Max, two guys are very sharp, so make sure to stay tuned on this link, and they'll give you the best information they can. Next game up, Minnesota 3.7 implied runs against Frankie Montas. Oakland on their side, 3.8 implied runs against Kenta Maeda. And Montas in this spot, I think, going to find some tough outs in the top of this order here. So much power with guys like Donaldson and Cruz and Buxton in the top grouping here. And Arias, too, just another dude who gets on base. 9% strikeout rate for him against righties is absurd, but that is what the man is. I like the Minnesota stack a bit more than Montas, but Greg, do you see any interest here in Montas at a price point that I think the projection looks good enough to get there? You mentioned it earlier, the pitching on the slate kind of ugly, where I think, to me, if I get some Montas, it's fine. I probably don't want to be above the field, the 22% ownership on DK. But how are you feeling about Frankie Montas in this spot?
I was actually just about to bump my exposure to Frankie Montas. I only have him in single-digit amount of my lineups right now, and I'd like to get a little bit more than that. But, I mean, relative to the other options on the slate, I agree. I think the 22% ownership projected by the field is probably a little bit high, but just because of the strikeout upside for Montas. And by the way, Montas has not pitched particularly well this year or last year from a run prevention standpoint. Last year, he had a 5.6 ERA, a 4.58 expected ERA, a 4.74 FIP. He's opened up this year with a 4.91 ERA, but the strikeouts are there for him. He's striking out over a hitter per inning in each of his last 3 big league seasons. So with that in mind, a price tag of only $7,600, I don't think there's a reason to target him on Fanduel. We only have to roster one pitcher. But on Draftkings, where it's a 2-pitcher site, and I don't feel I have concerns about basically everybody other than Max Scherzer. If I knew Dinelson Lamet was going to throw 100+ pitches, I would feel great about Lamet. But I don't know that's going to be the case for Dinelson Lamet coming off of an elbow injury. So Montas, just for that reason, is going to end up making my player pool a guy who's cheap with strikeout upside. I'm going to be a little bit underweight to the field on him.
And there are some strikeouts in the lineup. 5 guys who strike out above league average, a 23% aggregate K rate. But boy, that power is just terrifying to me to go too heavy on Montas. Their lineup today has got a 204 aggregate ISO, 330 on base percentage. There are a lot of ways here Montas can have a tough day. But I think, as Greg was saying, just as a symptom of the slate, because you don't have a lot of options out there, getting some Montas makes sense. And there are some worrying numbers, I think, over the last season and change, which conveniently, I guess, his post-PED time, up to a 4% home run rate, giving up a 1.5 whip, both those numbers up from a league average 2.9% on run rate, a 1.26 whip since 2019. So the numbers are trending down for Montas. And Greg, to me, I think that's why I would like Minnesota quite a bit today. They have a better chance of being a top stack relative to their ownership, also a better chance of being the top value stack on the day relative to their ownership. And I think if you were going to full stack a team here and get away from Houston entirely, I think Minnesota would be the team that I think has the most upside, just because you have so much power here. The Oakland bullpen is fairly tough behind them, so maybe that does limit things a little bit, along with the park factors here. But I just really like that top 4, the pricing for these guys. I guess Buxton's price is egregious on DraftKings, but still, you're paying a premium, but you're getting, I think, a little bit more of a discount compared to Houston. How are you feeling about this Minnesota stack? And are you with me here that they are one of the stronger stack plays on the slate?
It's not a team that I'm getting to say as much as, the Astros or anything like that, but relative to the ownership of the field, I'm more leveraged on Minnesota than I am a team like Houston, just because, Houston, when you have hitters who are all owned, 30 to 50%, if I have them all around 25%, that means I'm significantly investing them in terms of a chunk of my lineups. But overall, I probably come out ahead if the Astros underperform expectations a little bit. Whereas the Twins, even if I have them right now, as a stack 8% of the time, that's a lot more than the field, because there are guys like you mentioned, Buxton, who's, really expensive on DK at 6,100, but he's projected for less than 1% ownership. So it's not hard to get over the field on him. And then Jorge Polanco is the only guy who's really picking up significant ownership in the starting lineup. I guess Luis Ariz to an extent to at 11%. But I mean, beyond then, like Jay Cave is 9% owned, Nelson Cruz, 5%. Astudillo is only projected for 1% ownership. So I think that makes him a pretty good play at the first base and third base eligibility on DraftKings. So I do think this is a team to get overweight to the field on, especially because, like we said, Montas has struggled giving up runs. And to the point you mentioned, could be correlated to the fact that he's coming off a PED suspension. So maybe a reason to think that. Actually, I'm going to look up his velocity is up this year. So I thought, wouldn't it be funny if he came off PEDs and it's like, hey, he used to throw 96 and now he throws 89 or something like that. But no, still 97 average fastball velocity.
Okay, so good for him. I guess he kept some of that strength. I think you don't lose that. I don't know enough about taking PEDs to fully speak to it, but I do feel like he keeps some of that muscle going. You just can't keep building and hitting those workouts as hard. But definitely the power numbers for him that he's given up, to me, taking an appreciable jump here, and coincidentally happens to dovetail with those things. So who knows? Anybody you'd prioritize in particular from Minnesota? I do think, and it is such a steep price tag to pay for Byron Buxton, but I think that's one spot where if you're paying up there, especially if you're not playing the Astros, like he's had some crazy days over the last season and change. He's had a 369 ISO. Byron Buxton is one of those guys where if you weren't paying close attention last season and you just know him as the speed guy who's been a great outfielder and defensively in the 2019 year, as I mostly did because I didn't play a ton of MLB last year, Buxton's numbers really jump off the page in a meaningful way. Are you willing to pay that price tag at all on DK where he's, I think, the most expensive player on the slate?
So he's in 6% of my lineups. So the answer is kind of, because the field has him less than 1%. So I'm massively leveraged on Byron Buxton, but this is also one of those plays where, and I know that people kind of get frustrated with this when we talk about baseball sometimes, because it's not like NBA where it's like, here is the value play on the slate. Here is the pay up option. Everything to me is about ownership and then comparing, hey, this is what I have exposure to relative to the field. So me getting 6% Byron Buxton is significantly more than we have projected the field to have right now. So with that in mind, that does make him look like a really strong GPP play. It doesn't mean you go play him in 30% of your lineups or anything like that. But if you're building 20 lineups and you have him in one or two, you have way more than the field has. So in that vein, I think that Buxton's a very good GPP play.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I think he's certainly not a guy you don't want to have in 50% of your lineups at that price point. But there's no ownership going to him at all, and he has been clearly a monster. Not quite Nelson Cruz though. His numbers against righties, have been better power numbers than Nelson Cruz. Not quite as many at bats, but a 310 ISO compared to the 280 ISO for Nelson Cruz. Both numbers are fantastic, but Buxton, just trying to put it into context here, that Buxton has been a man possessed and enough at bats now to point out that this is what you can expect from him moving forward. And I would think that, to me, getting a little more bucks in my life would be the move that I'd want on DK. Any of these bottom of the order cheap guys standing out to you at all? Jake Cave, 2K on DraftKings. Brent Rooker, 2K as well. Neither guy fantastic, though Jake Cave has shown some pop in the past. And Rooker, too, to his credit, very small sample size, but has a 4% on run rate against righties in the majors so far. You also have Jeffers there, 2,700. Do you see any opportunity or any use for the cheap twins at the bottom of the order?
Jake Cave, just because of the price point. He's somebody who obviously not hard to get into lineups, especially when there's so much there's so much to pay up for on the slate, even with only being a 6-game slate. We've got the Angels playing, so we've got Mike Trout on the slate. We've got a whole bunch of pay up options at Coors Field. So that's one of the reasons that I think Jake Cave is making it into a double-digit amount of my lineups, is just because he enables me to pay up for so much else.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Let's talk about the Oakland side here. Kenta Maeda's numbers over the last year have been very strong, a big enough sample size, too, to think that he has made some meaningful improvements, up to a 30% K rate, facing 318 batters since the start of the 2020 season. Going back to 2019, a 28% K rate, facing an Oakland lineup that has 6 guys that strike out above league average, but also a lot of power in this lineup, aggregate 224 ISO for them. So Maeda, Greg, I think comes with some risk, but I would prefer him to Frankie Montas at the exact same price point on DK. I think the projection, too, will back that out. The ownership, too, is going to go a little bit heavier to Maeda, but definitely some risk on his side, too. I think we extolled the virtues of Minnesota. Really both sides here, despite kind of low run totals here, but both sides have a ton of power. Maeda, I like a lot. I like the ability a little bit more, I think, than Montas, or actually a good bit more than Montas, but he has the same risks here. You do have a pretty power-heavy lineup, guys that can get going at pretty much every spot, even the bottom of the order there, better than guys like Jake Cave and the Brent Rookers of the world, where you have Seth Brown, who's got some pop, Sean Murphy's got pop, Moreland, too. How are you feeling about Maeda in the spot where there's clearly some risk, but his arm talent might be as good as anybody besides Scherzer on the slate?
Yeah, he is my second most rostered starting pitcher right now, behind Max Scherzer. And then on the flip side, I really like the A's a lot also, just because of the power upside. So we're talking about a team in the A's that they have a lot of power. They're going to get a lot of home runs over the course of the season. They're also going to strike out a lot. And so all of that kind of equals together to be a really high upside GPP type thing to target. It's almost like a heavyweight MMA fight where it's like, hey, both these guys are priced at 8,100 and it's like minus 250 to finish inside the distance. I don't know what side's going to win out, but I know that somebody's going to score well here. So Kenta Maeda, I think definitely warrants the ownership. He's projected for 33% ownership on DraftKings. I'm currently over that number. I think that him and Scherzer is the ideal combination to have a pitcher for the slate. And then on the A's side of the game, if Maeda doesn't mind his P's and Q's, there's a lot of home run upside there. And it's a team that we have is a very significantly positive leverage score in our top stacks tool. Oakland picking up only 2% ownership, but 6% chance to be the top scoring team on the slate. So I'm pretty significantly overweight to the A's. I'm pretty significantly overweight to Maeda as well. So hopefully somebody does well here. Hopefully it's not like Maeda has 14 fantasy points and they score 4 runs, because that would kind of suck for me because I'm pretty exposed to both sides.
Yeah, no, I think that's reasonable. And Maeda, I think just quote some more numbers at you guys: a 0.92 whip, 2.8 xFIP since 2020, 40% chase rate, 17% swing strike rate. So if there is anybody who's well equipped here, only also a 3.1% on run rate, so a little bit above league average, but not crazy by any stretch. He's not getting hit hard. He's getting guys to miss. I think Maeda, I'm probably willing to feel a little more comfort with than Montas if you are going to match the field on either guy. Oakland side, though, you mentioned there is some volatility here. You think that there could be some power numbers. And again, not a lot of ownership going to anybody here. Highest owned guy on DraftKings is going to be Matt Olson, still under 5% owned, though, for him. I think the ownership on this side, incredibly appealing as well. The top stack odds also going to be much higher than their stack ownership, though. Still, as we mentioned earlier in the show, everything pales in comparison to Houston, so you got to frame it that way. But Oakland ownership, I guess, how much are you getting of these guys? Are you getting more than 6% of the overall number here in terms of your ownership? What's the number for you looking like?
Let's see. Let me just bring up what my stacks are. It was definitely double digits. Let's see. I have 12% A's stacks right now. Just based on those leverage numbers, I think that's a team, like I said, to pretty significantly go overweight to the field on. By the way, just mentioning Coors Field, because somebody asked in the YouTube chat, he said, Coors Field, bad weather, is that going to be an issue? It's a 10% chance of rain. That's not really something that I really weigh heavily. So that's not going to change my opinion on that game. But yeah, back to the A's. This is a team that I'm pretty significantly over leveraged to. I'll pull up my stacks individually in Fantasy Cruncher and see some of the players I'm getting the most of individually. Sean Murphy as a catching option is showing up in a lot of my A's stacks. Mitch Moreland and Matt Olson, I kind of split exposure to them at first base. Jed Lowry batting third for the A's, who, by the way, with Lowry, he's historically been a pretty good fantasy producer when he's been on the field. It's just kind of easy to forget about it because he was signed by the Mets last year and played 0 games for the Mets all of last year. He was hurt all season. But now that he's back with Oakland, the team he's had success with in the past, I think there's potential for Lowry to have a pretty good fantasy season, unless he's just totally compromised.
He's had a 400 on base percentage over the last season and change. I don't know if I think that includes some Mets at bats, but not a ton. 316 batting average, 162 WRC plus. Not a power guy, but definitely a part of a stack that can create some production and be a part of it. And I'm with you too. I think that Olson, Moreland at 2,800, it kind of sucks because if you're going to roster him on DK, you're not going to be playing Matt Olson because those guys with the same position as first baseman. But Moreland, with the power he has, and this team too, I think guys who get on base in front of him. I do think Moreland kind of a sneaky play at 2,800 in terms of value, but then you're not going to have Matt Olson. So you're losing on one of the better Oakland players, but one way to get different there. Both guys going to be the higher owned parts though of that Oakland lineup. Let's keep going here. And I guess let's do a quick little round of money time here. So I'll flip the hat. We'll give you guys the top 5 owned plays for the early slate. And let me just refresh the here just to make sure I got it right. But hey, money time. Woo, hard to get the same motivation up for the early slate ownership, but we just got a fresh run of ownership 3 minutes ago, and you can always get it yourself at awesemo.com/join. Check out all the packages on there and use that UFC promo code UFC261 if you want to get the MMA package as well. Top 5 owned plays on DraftKings: Max Scherzer 48%, Alex Bregman number 2 at 37%, number 3 Martin Maldonado 37%, number 4 Dinelson Lamet at 35%, and number 5 Chase McCormick at 34%. On FanDuel, the top 5, you have this is a weird one. I should know this is right. Mike Trout, 40%, Alex Bregman, 37%, Fernando Tatis, 36%, Max Scherzer, 33%, and Shohei Ohtani, 31%. And then FanDuel also has a very early slate. FanDuel's just, I hate the titling of their slates. Like, just call it something else. Very early is just lazy to me.
No, it's the worst. This is like, and then we'll say like, hey, can you make it different? They'll be like, all right, the super very early slate. There's just zero creativity in their website whatsoever. And I know your next question is going to be, because I've done shows with you before. So I don't think Mike Trout is going over-owned per se. But I'll amend that. I don't think he's a bad play, but the only reason it's hard for me to get to him in that kind of clip is just because there's so many guys to pay up for on the slate. Like, I have Mike Trout right now in 25% of my lineups. I consider that to be a very big number, but it's not relative to the field. And I just find it hard to generally be able to fit any one hitter into like 50% of my lineups to be overweight to a guy like that.
Yeah, and it's a really good matchup for Trout too, but he is going to be very highly owned on FanDuel. And, I agree with Greg. I think getting a good chunk of ownership still seems like the move there. I would be reluctant to move away from entirely, though. I think a lot of people may be sour about the chalk Mike Trout ownership the other day and the fact that he had a rare 0 overall in that game. But that's just the nature of MLB. Sometimes it's going to happen even for a guy like Trout, who is clearly the best player on the slate, I guess, besides Byron Buxton, who's priced a little more expensive on DraftKings. Let's go to our next game here. We got St. Louis 3.3 implied runs. And again, smash that like button, guys. We got one more hour of Live Before Lock coming on after this one. For the main slate, Terry, Alex, and Max will be taking you through all those games game by game. We got St. Louis getting 3.3 implied runs on the early slate against Max Scherzer. And St. Louis, I have had some tough times this week digging my heels in on them and being incorrect. So, Greg, I'll let you do the work here. Scherzer's K rate, fantastic, 32%, going against the St. Louis lineup with 6 guys that strike out above league average. Park factors as well should benefit him. Not a lot of home runs are going on at the Washington Park, but how are you feeling about Max Scherzer in this spot? And I think you've already given your takes, but give the people the overview one more time.
He is my most rostered pitcher on the slate. I don't really think there's a close second. He's striking out well over a hitter per inning again this year. So far, 11.37 strikeouts per 9 innings, 2.37 ERA, 3.23 expected ERA for Scherzer. He's, to me, the best overall play on the slate. I'm overweight to him. He's going to be in a really large portion of my lineups. I do have some concerns, unfortunately, with Scherzer for this season and for today and going forward. So I played some Cardinal stacks just for the sake of leverage because I'm going to be so invested in Scherzer. But definitely, if you're only making a handful of lineups, I wouldn't bother with the Cardinals and I would just go with Scherzer. But here is the red flag I have here with Scherzer. His velocity is down a pretty decent amount this year. Over the last 3 years, 95 mile per hour average fastball velocity. Last year, 94.9. He's opened the season with 93.6 as his average fastball velocity. Obviously, Scherzer's logged a ton of innings in his big league career. He's at almost 2,500 now. He's 36 years old. He's going to be turning 37 during the season. I have some concerns here for sure. The age, the mileage, the velocity dipping. But I just look at the other options on the slate, and it's like, if this was a bigger slate, I could say I'd get to less Scherzer, but Scherzer's in like 80% of my lineups right now just because I don't think there's an alternative.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think, the results for Scherzer have still been there. The K rate, as Greg mentioned, going to come down a little bit too with the velocity coming down. 34% K rate going back to 2019. That number dropped to 32% over the last season and change. XFIP also on the rise. The swing strike rate dropping a little bit from a 16% swing strike rate to a 15.3%. Same thing with the chase rate, 34.3 to 32.5. So there are signs of a bit of a drift down for Scherzer, but that's something I think to keep in your back pocket for a larger slate where you have ways to get away from him. On this slate, I'm with you, Greg. I think you just got to kind of take it here. At the same time, though, and again, I have been staunchly against the Cardinals this week, but today I do think their price is a little bit more reasonable. The fact you are getting some leverage against Scherzer, and the fact too, they have a 5% chance or 5.5% chance being the top stack, about a 9% chance being the top value stack. They're only going to be about 2% owned. So to me, this is a spot where I actually don't mind playing some Cardinals, whether it be a short stack or a mini stack. But Greg, how are you feeling about the Cardinals hitters here? Because going to be a tough matchup against Scherzer, but if those numbers are trending down, maybe not as tough as people are treating it as.
Yeah, so this is going to sound weird, but if I didn't have so much exposure to Scherzer, I would have much less interest in the Cardinals. But just because I do have Scherzer in about 80% of my lineups, I wanted to get some exposure to the Cardinals because I have some reservations about Max Scherzer that I just mentioned before, with the velocity declining, the strikeout numbers declining. There's reason to think he's going to be not quite as good this year as he's been last year. And I don't want to just totally sound like I'm hedging, but that's what I'm doing. I'm hedging on this slate. I have exposure to, a lot of exposure to Scherzer. I have a very limited amount of exposure to the Cardinals. I made like 3 or 4% stacks of them, just in case Scherzer gets blown up, because I think that's a possibility given the decline in his velocity. I don't want to just have my lineups totally riding on Max Scherzer as a whole. So still Scherzer, the much preferred part of this slate for me. And if you're playing even like 20 lineups, I would say have Scherzer in like 16 to 18 of them and don't even bother with the Cardinals. Just for me playing 150 lineups, I want a Cardinals exposure.
No, I agree. And I think that's something we talk about a lot, volatility spots. And Scherzer, I think I would err more on the side of thinking he's a good play, but on a short slate, especially if you are going to play some Scherzer, that's one way to hedge against yourself. And we talk about the concept of hedging a lot with OddsShopper, but hedging with your lineups, hedging with your MLB lineups, that's really one of the best places you can actually hedge within a DFS lineup. I think more than NBA, more than NFL. I think some of the other popular sports out there. So I'm with you. I think playing some Cardinals makes sense if you're playing a lot of Scherzer. And I think they look decent enough here. The price points to me, it's on a 5K Tommy Edman, who went went off the other day. It's under 5K for him, under 5K for Goldschmidt. Nobody over 5K, and you have some value too at the bottom of the order. Guys like Justin Williams and Andrew Kinsner. I don't even know how to say. I've never said that name out loud, but Knizner. That sounds about right.
I don't know. I called a guy. I called a guy named Chaz like 8 different names before. One more thing I want to point out on Scherzer before we move on. He has some really weird batted ball numbers this year too, where we've always known that when Scherzer struggles, he gives up home runs. So that in itself is also something where it's like, hey, if he's going to get blown up, I mean, we saw it on opening day. The first time he pitched, he gave up 3 homers in the first 2 innings. But so far this year, he only has a 14.3% ground ball rate, and he's 14.8% home run to fly ball rate. So that would mean that he would by far have the lowest ground ball percentage of his career, while simultaneously having the highest rate of fly balls he's allowed converting into home runs. That says to me that if we do see Scherzer struggle, it's probably going to be via the long ball. So that's something else that at least lends me to think that in a start where Scherzer doesn't go well, it probably means a decent amount of upside for the Cardinals.
Let's talk about the other side here. The Nationals going against Carlos Martinez, who his numbers have really fallen off of a cliff over the last season and change. And it's not the biggest sample size, only 172 batters over the last couple seasons going back to 2019. He's faced 372, but his strikeout rate's gone from 21.5% since 2019 down to 16% over the last season, from a 4.3 xFIP to a 5.1 xFIP, from a 1.4 whip to a 1.8 whip for this shorter term sample size here. I think the Nationals, it would be nice if we had some of the better hitters in there. Juan Soto, not available today, but you still have enough guys. I think Stevenson on top has shown enough in his limited majors time that I think I'm comfortable getting to him at 2,800, especially a pivot point, some of the Chas McCormick ownership perhaps. But I think this National stack, Greg, I'm interested in it. The ownership is not the best according to the top stack, still a bit over leveraged, but not so over leveraged that I think you could not get there. And I think, well, 5-man stacks would be completely unknown. It looks like more 3-man stacks, it would seem, for the Nationals. But how are you feeling about them? Because I do think the Carlos Martinez numbers to me just stand out as being incredibly poor and show the signs of a guy who maybe lost it over the last stretch.
I like Stevenson as a one-off play just because he's cheap on DraftKings and Fanduel. But as far as the stack goes, the Nationals are kind of banged up right now. Juan Soto placed on the injured list yesterday. That's a pretty big concern. I know you mentioned that there, but I don't really have much exposure here other than Stevenson as a one-off. I made very, very limited national stacks. I don't think they have a lot of upside. They're also negatively leveraged. So there's other teams I prefer to target on this slate. This isn't a primary play for me.
Okay, I'm a little more intrigued by the Trey Turners. I guess Trey Turner's price tag a little bit onerous, but Josh Bell too. I still like playing Josh Bell right now because I do think maybe the shorter term sample size, a bit of an aberration. He can get back to what we saw previously. Kyle Schwarber, the pop. I think there's more of a case to be made for these guys, but they are a little bit overowned on DraftKings, so that is something that maybe Greg is a little more on the right here. Just not a lot of reason to get there based on the ownership, but to me, good chance of being a top stack, and I think there's some potential here just based on Carlos Martinez being that bad. I guess the same token, Greg, do you have any interest at all in Carlos Martinez on a slate where we've talked about there's being a lot of guys you're just going to play because you have to play somebody there? Are you getting to him at all?
I am not. Carlos Martinez, somebody else who, although he's very far removed from being an elite starting pitcher, but I mean, there was a point in time where Carlos Martinez was not quite, Cy Young caliber, but he was still, one of the high-end starting pitchers in baseball. Also had a ton of fantasy upside because of his ability to strike guys out. And it's just kind of gone south for him the last couple of years. They've tried moving into the bullpen. That didn't work out. They've tried moving him back into the starting lineup, starting rotation. That hasn't really worked out. So last year was just a total disaster for Carlos Martinez after his stint in the bullpen went okay, except he didn't really deliver a whole bunch of value. They tried moving back into the rotation last year, ended up with a 9.9 ERA, 5.97 expected ERA. The strikeouts were way down. And so far this year, 7.7 ERA, 8.38 expected ERA. The velocity, which, by the way, there was a point in time when he first got called up, he had an average fastball velocity of 98 miles per hour, and he was able to blow guys away. His velocity isn't totally gone, but now being a guy who went from pitching upper 90s to a guy who has an average fastball velocity of 93.7, I think that's just the kind of dip that's made it so that he's not really a viable fantasy option, or probably even somebody who belongs in a big league rotation at this point in his career.
And I think there's one cheap guy we can hit on who's a much better play, but let's get to that game. We got Texas getting 3.6 implied runs against the Angels. And Jose Quintana over the last season and change has faced 75 batters, so not the biggest sample size. But his numbers are interesting to me because he's had a 28% K rate, a 2 whip, but a very unlucky 440 BABIP that I would think has to drop a bit more. The strikeouts have been there for him. He's about the same price as a guy like Carlos Martinez, $500 more. The projection from Awesemo looks really strong here too. And you are getting a Texas lineup that we know not a lot of pop available for these guys. They've been pretty bad more often than not. 27% aggregate strikeout rate in this lineup. 5 guys who strike out above league average. This spot to me for Quintana, I think, is a pretty good get well / maybe showing his better side if he has been unlucky. But I like Quintana as, I think, to me, probably the top pay down option to pitcher.
Yeah, so, I mean, in terms of him being lucky, unlucky, whatever, I mean, he's thrown 15 innings over the last 2 seasons, so it's such a small sample size that I'm not really reading into it too much. We go back to his last full season when he made 31 starts with the Cubs in 2019. His numbers weren't great, but he did strike out, 8 hitters per 9 innings. His walks were in check. He generally worked fairly deep into games. So, I mean, with that in mind, just given how poor the quality of pitchers are on the slate and the matchup against the Rangers, it doesn't get much better than a left-handed pitcher going up against the Rangers. They've struggled against lefties for the last few years. They also strike out a ton. So Quintana, that is a prime SP2 pitching target for me. My pitching exposure, Scherzer's the guy I have the most exposure to, my 8-2, and Quintana 3.
So similarly, there is a lot of, I guess, potential here to be a top stack for Texas. I know somebody in the chat was asking about Texas as a pivot to Minnesota, and the top stacks tool, it would seem to indicate a pretty big fan of Texas and perhaps some of the volatility here with Quintana, where, as Greg mentioned, going back to 2019, the numbers for Quintana look more reasonable, more understandable, but he's still getting up a 280 batting average, only a 21% K rate, not a lot of home runs, only a 2.6% home run rate, but still giving up more production here. And it does seem like Alex is advocating based on the top stack, or our data team is advocating based on the top stacks tool for a little more Texas than I would feel comfortable with here. And I guess you do have guys like Nick Solak and Joey Gallo, who Gallo, a pretty good hitter against fellow lefties, more than people may realize with a 302 ISO. Solak also gets on base pretty well, has hit lefties pretty decently. Charlie Culberson, same thing. You can make the case here. I think I'd prefer to go the Quintana side because of the price tag, but how are you feeling about Texas? Because it does seem like the top stack tool would indicate they have a three times higher chance here of being the top stack relative to their ownership.
Yeah, so I prefer Quintana. I have more exposure to Quintana than I do to the Rangers stacks. But like you said, I mean, the Rangers are only picking up 3.5% ownership as a team right now, with 9% odds being the top scoring team on the slate. So I look at that and I still think this is a contrarian team to target. So in terms of contrarian options of offense that we've talked about, we've brought up the A's, we brought up the Cardinals, but of the contrarian options, the Rangers are my favorite. 5.5% leverage score on our top stack score. That is the highest of any offense by a pretty decent margin.
And kind of similarly to what we talked about with Max Scherzer, where if I'm playing a good amount of Quintana, because of the volatility there, because of how he has, not been the best pitcher in the world, even though he's shown some strikeout ability recently, I think getting to the Rangers to me seems logical if you're getting a good amount of Quintana. And Quintana's going to be 33% owned on DK, so it's going to be pretty well represented. So getting some Texas in there, I think, makes sense, even though, as we talked about, they're not the best hitting team, especially against lefties, but they have enough guys here who could find production. I think the park factors, too, for the Angels going to be a little more beneficial as well. So let's talk about the Angels side, though, going against Mike Fultonevich, who similar to Quintana, not the biggest sample size over the last year and change, but based on what we have seen, he has fallen off a cliff. Even worse, if you go back to 2019, a 5.4% K rate, going back to 2020, a 9.6% home run rate. And I said home run rate, I think, or K rate instead of home run rate, 5.4% home run rate over the last season, a 9.6% home run rate. And again, very small sample size, but he's not missing batters at all. 7.7% swing strike rate, 26% chase rate. These numbers to me, Greg, jump out as being, I know they're going to be a little bit overowned, but I still would want to make sure to at least get a good amount of Angels exposure because Fultonevich has shown not a whole lot besides, I guess, a league average strikeout rate.
Yeah, I have to look at the ownership going to the Angels right now, where it's a team that right now we have 13% odds of being the top scoring team on slate, but a 21% ownership share. I'm going to be very, very significantly underweight to the field on Angel stacks. This is the second most rostered team on the slate behind the Astros. The Astros, to me, are warranted of the chalk. And it's not to say the Angels are in a bad spot, right? We have them the second best odds being the highest scoring team on the slate behind Houston, but the ownership is kind of comparable between the two. So I'm way underweight to the field on the Angels, and there's other teams that I'd rather stack relative to what the ownership is.
Yeah, that's fair. I think for me, I would want to get some here. I agree, though, that I wouldn't want to be too overowned because they already are overowned. But I think I would still want to get some number not too far off the field, probably more for 3-man stacks based on the ownership that we're seeing here, where that top four, every single guy going to be over 22% owned on DK, and then Justin Upton just shy of 20% owned on DraftKings. So a lot of ownership going to the 5-man. I think trying to capture some home run upside from a few guys would be the approach I would want. But we talked about Mike Trout earlier, Greg. So let's talk about him one more time because he's going to be a very crucial play based on the FanDuel ownership. How are you feeling about him? I guess now that we've talked about Foltynewicz a little bit more, talked about these guys, how are you handling Trout here? Because I think you said you're getting about 25%, and the field is going to be substantially higher.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the salary to pay up for Trout, he's never a bad option. However, when I build my lineups, it's just very rare that there's any one hitter who's going to be like, oh my God, this hitter shows up in you like 70% of my lineups. And you have to have Trout in over half your lineups to really be overweight to the field on him. So I'm underweight to the field on Trout. And a lot of it also is just because I think that the Angels as a whole are going so wildly overowned. I actually, just for the leverage purposes, I have exposure to Mike Foltynewicz for that reason. I do think there are some reasons to be optimistic about Foltynewicz for this season. The Angels, it's just too much ownership going for them for me to think they're a good stack in tournaments.
That's fair. I think I would still try to get some mini stacks or one-offs in there just because I do think Foltynewicz, somebody's going to get to him in this lineup based on just a massive power he's given up. A 242 ISO overall since 2019, a 270 ISO to lefties. I think there's a lot of ways where you could take maybe one or two or three Angels and try to capture that production and hope that one of them has an outlier day. But that to me would be the approach here. The full stack, as Greg talked about, and we just hit on with Top Stacks tool, which you can always see for yourself at awesemo.com/join. They are deeply overowned, so keep that in mind. Let's keep going here. We got our last game on the early slate. And again, stay tuned on this link after Greg and I jump off. You have Terry, Alex, and Max talking through every game on the MLB main slate. So you are getting double MLB action here on this link. So make sure to stay tuned. And of course, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know whenever we have new content for MLB. That's especially important because the shows are all over the place. Sometimes we don't even know until the night before, including today. So that's unfortunately the nature of the beast here, but important for you guys to know when we do have content out there because MLB has been, I think, more beatable than usual this year because of just people not playing as much and not as much volume. Last game here, Greg, we got Milwaukee, 3 implied runs going against Dinelson Lamet. You've talked about him a bunch earlier in the show, but over the last season and change, has faced 267 batters. Strikeout rate for him has gotten even better than it has since 2019. Since 2019, a 34% K rate up to a 34.8% K rate. But give the people again why you have some concerns here with Lamet coming off of an injury.
Yeah, so I mean, Dinelson Lamet, we haven't seen him pitch in so long, and it's twofold, right? He's been injured, but also the Padres have historically always been really, really conservative with Lamet. So I look at the ownership for him right now, where he's projected for what is it, like 40% ownership? 40% ownership. Last I looked. So with that in mind, I have to be underweight to the field on Lamet because I don't know what upside there is in him reliably if I'm only going to expect him to throw, like 3 to 5 innings. I would like to get some clarity from a beat reporter, but I mean, reporting, like if we think that the reporting is bad in NBA with just random news popping up, like baseball, Dinelson Lamet hasn't pitched in a very long time. He's making season debut, and we have no information on Dinelson Lamet for his first start of the season. So I don't know what kind of pitch restriction he's going to be on, but my gut feeling is that we're not going to see him work very deep into this game, making his first start of the year. So to me, I'm pretty wary of getting too much Lamet where I think he could be pretty restricted.
So I guess the question would be, because he's facing a Milwaukee lineup that's, Christian Yelich still out, 8 guys in the lineup who strike out above league average. And we've seen a lot of guys have outlier performances against Milwaukee recently, including Lamet's teammate, Joe Musgrove, had one of the better days I think we've seen this year, besides, I guess, his no-hitter. So definitely been some positive results there. I guess the question for me would be, can Lamet get enough production even if he pitches 4.5 innings or 4 innings, let's say, because there's so many easy strikeouts here, and his stuff has been so good where he's missing bats pretty well, 14% swinging strike rate. The chase rate's there. He doesn't give up a lot of power, only a 0.9 whip over the last season. That'd be my question here, because I think the projection from Awesemo makes me think that I assume that, the data here is accounting for the fact that maybe he doesn't pitch that deep, but is it possible he just gets enough strikeouts to be worthwhile, even if he's only pitching 4.5 innings?
By the way, I did just look up, and this is not official, but Dennis Lin, who writes for The Athletic and is a Padres reporter, he wrote that he's guessing that Lamet is not allowed to throw more than 80 pitches today. So
Gotta work fast.
That's not very deep into the game, especially he's a guy who's had command issues in the past. And it's not to say he doesn't have upside. I absolutely think he has upside, but I have to look at the ownership. And I don't think the ownership accounts at all for the pitcher for a potential pitch restriction. If he's really going to be 40% owned, what would his ownership be in this spot on a slate that also has Scherzer? If there was no pitch count restriction at all for Lamet, wouldn't he still be like 40%? Like, it's not like all of a sudden he'd be 60 or 70%. So I just think the field is not, I just think the field is not accounting for potential limitations coming back from an elbow injury.
So then I guess, are you taking Lamet entirely out of your player pool, or are you just cutting his ownership down? Because like, I think you're making a lot of good points here, and the pitch count, it's going to be tough for him to get, 7, 8 strikeouts and 80 pitches. He would have to work incredibly well. And there has been some control issues, as Greg mentioned there, but how much are you getting of him then? Because I think based on what you're saying, I feel like I would still get 20% of him just because it's a weak pitching slate. And he clearly does have the strikeout ability to work fast and get results.
I have him in 14% of my lineups right now. So about a third of what the field has. So still somebody who here's the situation where I actually think Lamet works himself into the optimal lineup. Obviously, if he just happens to go nuts and he pitches like 4 innings, but strikes out, 10 guys in 4 innings, like sure. But I don't really think that's a realistic scenario. The more realistic scenario where I think he ends up in the optimal lineup is if Scherzer struggles and just a bunch of the cheaper pitchers are mediocre. In that type of situation, maybe Lamet scores 15, 16, 17 Draftkings points and ends up being optimal just because the other pitchers struggle. On Fanduel, where it's a single pitcher slate, and there's also points for a quality start, I don't think it's likely at all that Lamet goes 6 innings with his pitch count restriction. So not a consideration for me at all on Fanduel. Draftkings, I'm significantly underweight to the field on him.
So given that you're underweight to Lamet, are you also getting any Milwaukee stacks here? Very low implied total. As we mentioned, a tough matchup. They are a less good hitting team, obviously, with some of the guys that they're going to have out of the lineup, but still a 4.5% chance of being the top stack, 14% top value stack chance here, only 3% ownership, and you're getting leverage against a lot of the field who will be treating Lamet like he is the normal guy who's been out there before. Are you interested in Milwaukee at all? Because you do kind of have to squint your eyes if you're going to get there, given that just not a lot of dudes here can actually do things on the field, it seems.
Not really. I have a couple Brewer stacks, but nothing significant. And the issue I have here, so number one, even if Lamet doesn't have a big fantasy game, he could just be restricted and have, like 4 solid innings, and the Padres have a good bullpen behind him. So the Brewers, no matter where they are in the game, I think they're likely to be facing pretty difficult pitching. So I don't think there's a whole lot of upside in them. I think the real play here is just to be underweight to the field on Dinelson Lamet, unless you feel differently than me and you're just really confident that he's going to throw either 100 pitchers or just going to totally dominate in 4 or 5 innings. For me, where we have 2 pitchers to pay up for, I strongly prefer Scherzer to Lamet.
And our last team here, so hit that like button, guys, and stay tuned for Terry, Alex, and Max coming up the second we finish this stream talking about the main slate. San Diego, 4.5 implied runs against Adrian Hauser. It looks like the ownership for them going to be a bit higher than their chances of being a top stack. 8.5% chance of being a top stack, 9.7% ownership expected for him. Hauser's stuff over the last years kind of taken a big drop off. 18% K rate, 1.5 whip compared to a 22.3% K rate that already wasn't that great. Going back to 2019, a 1.3 whip. I honestly don't love either side here, Greg. I think I would err a little bit more on the side of San Diego. I think the lefties in particular, Hauser gives up a 202 ISO to left-handed bats. I think that jumps out a little bit more, but I don't really love either side. I wouldn't be opposed to getting a little bit more of the Padres as one-offs or mini stacks and optimizations, but how are you feeling about Hauser or San Diego? Does either side pop up meaningfully for you?
No, I have Tatis in lineups as a pay-up option at shortstop, but beyond that, I don't have double-digit exposure to anybody on the Padres. Just a lot of guys who it's like, hey, this guy's in 3 to 4% of lineups just where they, fit into other spots, but I'm not a priority team. The Padres not a team I'm really dying to target. I don't think Hauser is particularly good, but the Brewers do have a good bullpen behind them. Although Devin Williams has struggled this year after basically not being hittable at all last year. He allowed, I think it was like 1 run and 0 home runs all of last year. And he's already like tripled the amount of runs that he's given up so far this year, like right off the bat. So either way, though, I think the Brewers have one of the better bullpens in baseball and not the best matchup to target the Padres. There's other spots I prefer.
I guess we covered everything we had to. Let's get a home run pick in before we call it off here and we'll get Terry, Alex, and Max up on the stream talking about the main slate.
Yeah, so I mean, he's popular, but I think for a good reason. I think the guy most likely to homer today, Alex Bregman, going up against Austin Gomber. He's in Coors Field. Bregman absolutely destroys left-handed pitching, so Give me the guy who's going to be most likely to hit a home run. So Spags, go pick somebody else because that was who you were going to take.
No, that wasn't. We always, I guess it's something that was before your time. We never used to pick Horace for the home run pick, but I guess you're bringing your classic Greg Flair here, taking the easy out. So I'll be more contrarian. I'll go to Eric Hosmer as my home run pick going against that 202 ISO that Hosmer gives up to lefties. Hosmer's had a 2% home run rate over the last season and change. So he's my guy. And frankly, a lot more courageous than an Alex Bregman, I'd say.
All right. So, well, now I feel like I'm pressured into taking somebody else. Let me just go through. Okay, here's as a one-off, Joey Gallo, right? I mean,
lefty.
Joey Gallo, lefty. There's almost no ownership there. But if you're taking somebody as a Rangers player, just a one-off, like Gallo's somebody who's going to hit a bunch of home runs this year and is probably going to do it a lot with nobody on base because the Rangers have a bad offense. But homer or bust player and Joey Gallo, I think as a one-off, as a GPP play, I don't mind him.
There you go. I salute your courage. Make sure to follow Greg at G Ehrenberg DFS. Follow at Chris Spags. Follow at Awesemo_com. Like the video. And, of course, subscribe to the channel so you can see all the content we have going on all day long for the MLB, NBA, PGA, MMA, everything out there. And stay tuned on this link. Coming up next, Terry, Alex, and Max talking about the live before lock, going game by game for the main slate. Hope you guys have a great early slate. Enjoy the show coming up next. We'll see you guys again soon. Bye.
Awesemo MLB fans, a little back-to-back and belly-to-belly MLB show action for you today. Just got done covering the early show on with Spags and Greg. Now it's Terry McBride. That's me. I'm here with Max Smotritskiy and Alex Baker as usual. And we're going to be covering the main slate, the 6 o'clock hour. So you got a couple games coming up. So if you're about to play those wacky little slates for the 4 o'clock hour games, you can rewind a little bit, but then you'll miss all our coverage of the main slate. But it's all on this same stream. So the guys did cover those little 4 o'clock slate games. I think there's a 3-gamer on each site. But we're here to talk through the main slate with these guys. Guys, how we doing? How's everybody feeling?
All right. Doing good, man. I've been all morning trying to buy up $1 tops digital NFTs. I have like 1,600 of these things. I bought most of them between like $1 and $5.
Nice. That's what I mean. Hey, if it goes anything like that other NFT site, we know that that's the strategy to get in early and get them cheap while you can, and then hopefully flip them. So yeah, I'm looking to do the same. Maybe not to that kind of volume, but Max, I know you're in there as well. You doing the same kind of thing?
Yeah, just everything looks so cheap. Everybody's kind of having a conniption over the way the packs were distributed and if you open them early or not. So everybody like wants to sue Topps. It's crazy. Everything is so cheap. I love it.
Yeah, I thought I was running hot for a little bit while I was opening the packs, and then I realized, no, that's just math. And then I realized we were doing the numbers that way. And I felt still good about what I got, but not quite as lucky anymore.
Yeah,
guys, we're here. We're here, guys, to talk about MLB DFS. And as you guys know out there, you get all your favorite DFS-based shows from Awesemo. Everything except for the live before locks that we do, all the evergreen stuff, goes up on your favorite podcast networks. You guys hear us talk about it a lot. Everything that you want to absorb from content, if you miss it in the morning, you can catch it at your convenience at any time through the day. Jump on your favorite podcast network. We need the downloads, the Bill Simmonses of the world, some of those bigger sites. They don't need your downloads. We need the love. We need your thumbs up. We need your subscriptions. We need your downloads because it helps us get bigger and bring you more of that content that you love. So what we want you to do, if you can, is leave us a 5-star review. We're going in there once a week, and we're raffling off a week-long subscription of Awesemo Platinum Plus to one lucky winner. So if you leave us a review, your review is good for up to 1 year. Every week you get entered, and we're giving away a week free every single week to people who leave us 5-star reviews. We're brought to you today by OddsShopper.com. It is the best place to lay out a board of all the different odds. If you're making bets and you're not using OddsShopper.com, which is a free site that goes through Awesemo, you're just doing betting wrong. It lays out every single online book that we have access to, all the available lines for everything from point spreads, player props, over-unders, everything that you're looking to bet for every major sport laid out, helps you shop the odds. It is the biggest edge that you can get in sports betting. OddsShopper.com. Check it out. We'll get into a little bit more on OddsShopper a little later on. Like and subscribe, guys. I didn't crush you with too many reads there. Free top stacks at the site today. We've got the free NBA Big Board, NHL top stacks, PGA rankings are free today. All kinds of free content for any sport that you might be looking to play. We've got MMA coming up, UFC 261 this weekend on the 24th. You guys excited for that? I know you're excited for the DFS side of things. Are either you guys going to watch this UFC thing, UFC pay-per-view?
I mean, I'm always intrigued by the UFC stuff. So it's a lot of fun to sweat it. Usually I go 50-50 on the pay-per-views where I'll watch like the prelims because I have the ESPN Plus, but then it gets to the main event and it's like, do I really want to throw out like $50 for this? So that's about the point I drop off. How about you, Max? Do you watch some UFC?
I watch all of it. I'm like a UFC junkie now. I bought a UFC subscription where I can watch every fight that's ever happened. So I've really gotten into it since COVID hit.
Wow. That's impressive. I mean, you've talked to us before, Max, about how you got into it with COVID and everything because it was the only thing going on, but it sounds like you're kind of getting into it as a real UFC fan at this point. That's really cool. Yeah, is it something where I'm sure that knowledge base isn't built up though? Can you talk to us for a quick second about some of the stuff that you get maybe at the site that you use when you build DFS lineups for UFC? Like what's your favorite thing to go to there?
All I use is the top fighters tool, really. I just find like using a statistical approach that Alex puts out there is just takes away all the biases of watching the fights, like the previous fights. I still watch them just to see the way a guy fights or if they fight fast or not. But like everything that you really need is in the top fighters tool. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
It has like pace in there, and pace just helps you so much in finding the fights that are going to score the most points.
Yeah, and it's all just laid out on a nice little dashboard. It is by far the best tool in the industry for that. And I've said it a bunch of times already. Everybody's sick of hearing me say it, but I don't know a thing about UFC. It's not my sport, not my space. But I've won money utilizing our tools, our rankings, and everything from the site. So you guys can get access to that. That's the reason we're talking about it. We're running a promo, 50% off your first month, which is now going to cover UFC 261 and another pay-per-view from what I understand. plus all the in-betweens every week they're doing something. UFC 261 is the promo code. So the letters UFC, the numbers 261, 50% off your first month of Awesemo MMA. Get your projections, ownership, the top fighters tool we were just talking about, everything you need. Stop guessing, start winning. Guys, we've got kind of a wacky slate. It was split already between the two sites because DK included the 7-inning game where Fanduel didn't. That's the Pirates at Tigers game. And then we lost a game to the weather. We lost the White Sox and Indians game. So now we've got 5 on Fanduel, 6 on DK, or maybe 5 2/3 if we're looking at that 7-inning game. Just in general, Alex, if you could tell us a little bit, just how do you treat the 7-inning games, particularly on a shorter slate? Is this something where you're willing to consider it kind of a full-blown game, or is it still something where you're shaving off the top?
I think for the 7-inning games, I'm really just considering the bats because only having 6.5 innings for like the home team and 7 for the away team, that's a big disadvantage for putting up 10 plus runs. So it looks like the Pittsburgh Detroit one is the 7-game one. So I'm gonna look at some pictures there, but to be honest, they don't look the most exciting. So might be just one to avoid.
Just wanted to avoid. Max, are you willing to go to any of the? We'll get into it in the game by game, but just from a 7-inning game perspective, is that somewhere you're willing to go, or especially making only a handful of lineups, is that one that you just kind of immediately cross off?
It's funny. Yesterday, when I was just looking at the games before the show, I took a bunch of notes on the Oakland and the Twins game, and I had Mitch Moreland circled. And he hit 2 home runs. But when I figured out it was a 7-inning game, I just crossed him off my list and didn't play him. So, I don't know. Sean Manaea was like the nuts yesterday because he went the full game. It was a complete game shutout. But it's such like a small percentage of outcomes there that you're trying to get. I get it today. Both pitchers are in play, I guess. I don't know. Turnbull is coming off the COVID list, so I'm not really interested there. And then Keller, I don't know, he's very inconsistent. I don't know. I feel like this is the game that you can cross off. Yesterday was a little bit more interesting with 2 good teams with good hitting options. Neither of these teams have really good hitting options, and the pitchers are kind of have question marks as well.
Yeah, and we'll talk them through in a little bit more detail. We got a little bit more time today. Don't have to sprint through everything. But, I kind of agree. This was a game that I wouldn't necessarily have gone to. I might have thrown some Mitch Keller at the Tigers just because I'm a Mitch Keller sucker. But if I was going to cross a game off, it would have been this one. I do think we lose from not having the Cleveland and the White Sox on here. And we've also got ridiculous continued cold throughout the Midwest to deal with. So that's going to impact the Mets at Chicago game. I like those Mets bats. I like the spot, but the cold concerns me. We'll get into that a little bit. And then we've got potential rain in Boston. So Alex, you're kind of tuned into the weather a little bit. Does the rain in Boston concern you? What's your read on that as far as postponement potential, delay potential?
So at this point of the day, usually I'm looking at the precipitation probabilities because it's too far out for radar. So I see it does kind of peter out around 7 p.m. The app I really like for weather, if you guys don't have this, you should download it. It's Dark Sky because they give you not only the probability but the severity of the rain. Now, Dark Sky is saying a lot different picture than Google because it says it's going to rain pretty decently between 7 and 9. So that would be one where maybe what is the time of this one? 7. So
7. Yeah.
Okay, so that one going up to lock, we're going to have to really be paying attention to see how it's looking.
Yeah, that one's going to be critical, and I agree. It's going to be important going into lock, which, unfortunately, we're dealing with a 6-10 lock on DK and a 6-10 on both sites, actually. So little tricky to deal with that. And, of course, those are locking for the game that got canceled. Otherwise, we would have had an extra 25 minutes to work with. So that's fun. Just a little wrinkle on the slate. I suppose it's possible that they would push it back because of that, but I doubt it. That's going to be.
They usually do push it back if there's a postponed game. Right now, it's saying on Draftkings, lock is 6:35.
Okay, good. So they did move them back. All right, good. I didn't remember them doing that for postponed first games. That's excellent. That's atypical of the way that the sites usually treat their customer support.
Yeah,
good to see.
It's interesting because like last year, or maybe it was a couple of years ago, they changed the way postpones work. So if you have guys in a postpone game now, if it happens before the start, the players lock, they just don't lock until the end of the slate. So you can make late swaps even if it's past like the start time.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
It's nice, but pros like us never would have players in a game that would be postponed. So
I guess that's why I didn't realize it. Yeah, I've never had that. Cool, excellent. That's actually good to know. That could, I'm sure, come in handy at some point during the season. I never realized that. So, all right, let's jump in. I think we're talking a little game by game then. So, getting into the first one, we've got the Atlanta Braves in the Bronx. Braves coming in as plus 118 dogs with a 4.05 implied total, taking on the Yankees minus 128 favorites with a 4.53 implied total. In Anderson on the hill for the Braves, taking on Corey Kluber. Anderson, sophomore season, still counts as a rookie, but dynamic debut last year, 32 innings pitched, 29.7% strikeout rate, 3.45 xFIP with a 1.08 whip. Excellent to start the year this year over his 15 innings, 28.4% strikeout rate, walked right around the same at 10.4, lowered the xFIP to 2.82 so far. Higher whip, 1.43, but very small sample, so that'll probably regress to the norm. So it's still a very small sample, but I expect that he is a high-quality pitcher. He's a kid that they were excited about coming up, high pedigree prospect on his way up through the system. Corey Kluber, we know, trying to rebuild what he once was at the age, at an advanced age. I think he's in his mid to late 30s. I think 37, I want to say. But we know he was excellent through his career and has just missed a significant amount of time leading into this year. Reclamation project for the Yankees, 10 innings this year so far, 22.6% strikeout rate, 13.2% walk rate is a little painful, 4.94 xFIP, 2.23 whip. That is getting a little bit ugly, but we're hoping that he rounds into form as Yankee fans. Max, what do you think of our guy Corey Kluber here? Does he have a chance to put up a nice start against a Braves team that is pretty good at hitting right-handed pitching?
Yeah, I don't think so. Kluber still has pretty good swing and miss stuff. It's just that when he does leave the ball over the plate, it gets hit really, really hard. He's just given up way too many hard hits and barrels so far this year. I want to stack the Braves. It's getting cold here in New York. It was like 70 all day, but we just had a thunderstorm. And now it's going to be like mid 40s by game time. But the wind is going to be blowing out to the short porch at like 15 miles an hour. So that's nice. I think a Brave stack makes sense here just because their team total is low. And I feel like they're going to go a little bit under-owned based on Kluber's reputation, but he's not the same guy that he used to be.
Alex, you reading that the same way, kind of looking at the Braves bat if we're making that decision between Kluber and a Braves stack, say if somebody's building one lineup, would that be the way you would go in terms of just that specific decision?
Well, I think Kluber's off the board for me. He hasn't gotten more than 77 pitches this season over 3 starts. Part of that's just due to poor performance, but when you put him up in a tough matchup, then there just really isn't much reason to go there. On the flip side, Atlanta is looking like a pretty decent stack, minus the weather kind of being a little colder there. So they're priced up today. It might be a little expensive to get them, but they're definitely worth some shots.
Yeah, Braves are one that popped for me. I mentioned them a decent amount of the time through last year in terms of being an excellent hitting team against right-handed pitching. Not a lot has changed this year. They have a 190 ISO as a team so far this year. That stands third in baseball. They've hit tied for the league lead 21 home runs against right-handed pitching this year. So very much in the same vein that they were last year as an excellent team to throw at righties, despite a fair amount of their power coming from the right side of the plate. They also strike out 8th best in the league, 23.1% strikeout rate. In splits that are frankly up across the league. That's still very good. So I think I can definitely get to some Brave stacks here. It looks like they're drawing a little bit of ownership, but it's like right in line with their probability of being a top stack on FanDuel, similar, a little bit over what their probability of being a top stack on DK is. But I think there's room to work in there. I think there's a significant amount of upside. On the other side of things, do we like Ian Anderson going up against this tough but struggling Yankees lineup that does have a good number of strikeouts? A couple guys that are very good at avoiding strikeouts, but overall, their biggest bats, their power hitters do have tendency to swing and miss. Alex, is this an Ian Anderson game for you?
Definitely like him as a prospect. He did go more than 90 pitches in his last game, which was encouraging. The lineup the Yankees are rolling out today is about average for the strikeouts. So given they have a really good lineup that has a lot of power, that is going to be a high variance spot. So I think Anderson is worth some tournament darts. Just because it's like if you can limit the run production, which mostly is random, then he might have a good one.
Max, what about you as a Yankee fan? Are you going to throw this kid against our boys here and hope that their struggles continue, or are you hoping for the Yankees to break out today and rolling with some stacks?
No, I love Ian Anderson. For me, he just has the best raw stuff on this slate. So I always want to play a guy like that, especially when he's 8.4K. Yeah, I mean, the Yankees lineup, like Alex said, they don't strike out as much as you think. So that's a problem. But Ian Anderson just has really good stuff. Like, I really liked Charlie Morton yesterday, and he did well. Just didn't strike out as many guys as you'd like. But I'm still decent start for his salary. I'm not like expecting Ian Anderson to have like a 30-point game here, but I think he can put up a good score like in mid-20s for you most of the time. And the ownership on him looks good. He looks about half as owned as Tyler Mahle will be. And I just think Ian Anderson is a better pitcher.
Yeah, that was a spot that stood out for me a little bit. Just comparing those two, they were the top two on my board. I've talked about Mahle a couple times, kind of a sucker for everything he does and some of the underlying stuff, but the ownership is frightening on him today. So that kind of jumped out to me. And yeah, Anderson stood out for not drawing that same kind of ownership, having a little bit of room in comparison to his metrics for being one of the top options. Just going up against that tough Yankees lineup, Yankee Stadium, I think people tend to shy away from matchups there because of those reasons. We did see, or we do see pretty frequently, I guess I should say, some lazy fly balls to right field that wouldn't be home runs in any other park. Get out of this park. So if we're looking at Braves bats, or if we're looking at bats on both sides, I guess, we know that righties can target that right field porch pretty easily, just as well as lefties. But we do have a couple quality bats on the Braves lineup from the left side of the plate, or that hit from both sides of the plate. Thinking of Freddie Freeman on the left, Ozzy Albies hits from both sides, and Pablo Sandoval hits from both sides. And then I already touched on the fact that guys like Marcell Ozuna have no problem hitting right-handed pitching. Dansby Swanson has no problem hitting right-handed pitching. Austin Riley has problems making contact, but when he does, the ball tends to travel. So there's just a lot of power in this Braves lineup. A lot of guys I'd like to get to in stacking against Kluber, who I agree with you guys, I think is in a tough spot and just struggling. We talked about crossing him off of our lists. I kind of wish Brian Cashman had done that on his list. Like the story, I wish Kluber was, I wish this was 5 years ago, Kluber. That's a long wind up to ask. Max, which of the Braves bats are you liking the most here?
So I want to gravitate to guys that don't swing and miss as much at the breaking stuff. So guys that like to make contact, like Freddie Freeman makes a ton of contact. So their lineup, Cunha is still out, which kind of sucks. Yeah. But Ozuna, Darnell, those guys with the shortened swings are the ones I like to target Corey Kluber with. Because if you lay off his breaking ball, you can't really get the fastball by. So he's either going to walk you or leave you a meatball to hit. So those are the kind of guys I would target over guys like Austin Riley, who has a ton of power, is cheap, but swings and misses a ton.
Yeah, absolutely. Riley's one of those kind of hitters that this could easily be a 0, or it could easily be a home run game with a handful of RBIs. Alex, do you have favorite bats from the Braves? Do you have any concern? We have Ehire Adrianza leading off here, switch hitter from both sides of the plate, but not a lot of pop, not a ton of hit tool either. Just a 272, 349, 416 triple slash and 236 plate appearances in 2019, 191, 287, 270 across 101 opportunities last year. Just not a great hitter. Kind of clunky to put at the top of a batting order. Does that concern you at all, just about the Braves' batting order's ability to get out early? And would it take them down a peg for you as a stack, or are you just kind of focused on the middle and not worried about it?
I don't think it's a huge difference for the stack, but you do have a leadoff hitter that's 2,100 on DraftKings, 2,400 on Fanduel with the Adrianza. So that is really cheap for a leadoff hitter for a good team. So that's kind of a gift and a curse, because you got this easy way to create an Atlanta Braves stack because the other guys are expensive. but then like a lot of ownership is going to be piling on him too. So particularly on DraftKings where we have him at 17% projected ownership. So that's almost a situation where it's an easy way to make a stack that's a little bit unique by just not having him.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Another guy that pops out for me just as being a little bit unique, and then we'll move on from this Braves stack. But if you're playing on the Fanduel slate, Travis d'Arnaud hitting cleanup. I know we don't typically roster a ton of catchers, but he's a decent bat for a catcher. Hitting cleanup pretty cheap at 2,900, drawing no ownership in the middle of that Braves order on Fanduel. So I think that could be a little bit interesting as a way to just kind of shake things up. Moving across to the Yankees side of things, one thing that Anderson has struggled with a little bit this year is quality contact. His barrels rate has really increased dramatically from where he was. We saw him do very well limiting hard contact, and the power numbers are down because of it in my home run model last year, but it's up this year. It's not concerning necessarily because it is a little bit wonky and it is a very short sample. But Max, does that give you, I guess it probably wouldn't give you pause based on your enthusiasm for Anderson, but would it lead you toward maybe grabbing some of these Yankee stacks as well with this Yankees lineup that they rolled out today?
It just seems he's been getting a little bit unlucky. Like he's giving up 53.3% line drives to lefties. That's going to go down. It just feels like, they're catching it in the middle of the bat and he's getting hit hard. But I don't expect it to continue based on his stats last year. And Yankees don't really have that many good left-handed hitters that hit for power anyway. Like Mike Ford showed some flashes. Aaron Hicks is better for power from the left side, but hits for worse average than he does from the right. So, yeah, I mean, if I'm going to take a shot, I'm just going to take a shot on like Stanton, Judge, and those types of players that can have a good game versus anybody versus targeting like cheaper guys.
Makes sense. Alex, you reading that one the same way before we move on to this next game that we'll kind of fly through?
Yeah, I think the Yankees always interesting. Matchup is a little bit tough. Maybe that'll drive the ownership down. But the ownership does look quite high compared to what I would expect with the matchup, where about 12% on DraftKings, 14% on FanDuel. So that's kind of a warning sign, but it's hard to fade the Yankees because they do have so much power.
Yeah, it's one of my teams that they pop for me, just based on what I drive through my model a fair amount of the time. And then being a homer, they end up in my lineups all the time. Then I always start thinking, what if I win something and then people see me and then it's just silly. But moving on, guys, we've got – go ahead.
The good thing about being a Yankees homer is they're actually good. It's a lot worse being a homer of a team that sucks. I can attest to that.
Yeah, good for the ego, good for the DFS bankroll as well. That's for sure. Moving on, we touched on this one coming in because it's the wonky one with the 7-inning game, but we'll go through it a little bit. We've got the Pirates against the Tigers in Detroit. We have Pirates coming in plus 112 with a 290 implied run total, taking on the terrible Tigers, who are favored in this one with as a minus 121 favorite, 3.15 implied total. Game is not on the FanDuel slate. Mitch Keller versus Spencer Turnbull. We talked about it really quickly, but Keller 11 and a third innings, 5.36 xFIP this year, 21.1% strikeout rate, 14% walks. 2019 was his real standout year coming up from the minors, 28.6% strikeout rate that year. He was a mid to high 20s guy in the minors. Lost some spin rate and some velocity on his four-seamer since that year, and it seems like it's hurting him, and he's trying to find it, but that's just a little bit anecdotal on my part. Turnbull, Max, you mentioned it, coming off the COVID list, first start of the year, made 4 starts last year, 4.53 xFIP, 21.1% strikeout rate, and a 12% walk rate. We touched on the pitchers in terms of maybe it's you get one of those wacky 7-inning results. Is that going to make us roster either of these pitchers as SP2s on DK? Alex, is that something that interests you?
I'm thinking no, just because, as you're saying, Keller's best years were behind him at this point, where last year his strikeout rate was 20%, and this year 21%. Although this is only 27 total innings that he's played over the last season, so not a big sample. The Tigers lineup isn't good, but they don't strike out a ton either, so have them about 5% less strikeouts than your average team. So there's nothing really drawing me to Mitch Keller here.
Max, what about you? Either one of these pitchers, or if not, talk to me about bats. Which side of this game would you go to for any bats, and then we'll move on.
It's tough. Like Keller starts this year, xFIP of 6, xFIP of 2, xFIP of 8. I don't know. Like last game, his strikeouts were way down for whatever reason and gave up a ton of hard contact. It's cold with wind blowing out in Detroit. I mean, I don't know. 7-inning game. I wouldn't roster any bats from either of these teams. It's not like you have crazy prolific offenses that you're fading just because it's a 7-inning game. And both of these pitchers can do well here for their price, but with Turnbull, like I would be more interested in Turnbull, but just because he has a 75 to 85 pitch limit, I just don't think he can go deep enough. And he's not a strikeout guy, really. That's going to give you a bunch of points. Like yesterday, Ohtani was on a pitch count, but he still struck out like 7 guys in 4 innings or whatever he was. So he still gave you a decent score. I don't think Turnbull can do that. So it's kind of like a pass for me from both sides here.
Yeah, it's not like the same debate, like you mentioned Ohtani yesterday, or it's not like the same debate like with Dinelson Lamet today, where he could pitch only 4 innings and strike out 10 guys. It's a totally different kind of a pitcher. I think I would prefer Keller if I was rostering a pitcher. Just I like the strikeout upside a little bit better on his end against some of these Tigers, but I don't think I would go to either pitcher, and I don't really think I need either of these bats. I think as we've kind of covered, this is the game that we would probably not be looking to it for bats anyway. So why go to it just because when it's a 7-inning one? So I think we can safely move on from that one, guys. You've been to the site. You're here for some of the free content on YouTube. You grab the free content up on the site, but you're not getting the full experience if that's how you're treating Awesemo.com. You're missing out on the behind the paywall projections and all the various tools and data. Yeah, we put a few things out every now and then for free. We have a free piece of content every day to help appeal to people and to help you guys out. But really getting behind the paywall is the way to really join the team, join the Awesemo.com experience, and get the full package. You get our premium Slack channels. We are all hanging out in there all day long. Maybe me more so than others because I have nothing else to do in these days of COVID. I haven't gotten my shots yet, but I think I just missed a call from them actually. But I'm in there like 22 hours a day, just answering questions, talking shop. It's fun for me. So I'd be doing that even if it wasn't my job. And if you're missing out on Slack, you're missing out on things like our game plan show. Alex did one right before we hopped on here. I don't know what he focused on because I wasn't able to watch it, but we talk about all sorts of stuff. And the thing that he mentioned about where he goes for weather, he mentioned that on his first game plan show of the year. And I completely changed where I go for weather because of that tip. That was behind the paywall. You pick up all sorts of things. We're doing different little class type, very small group sessions where it's almost like a class. We're taking you through some of the things we talk about offline from FC, like Excel and how to use sorting tables in Excel on those shows. You get all our projections, our tools, all the different content, and you're a member of the community. The best way to go about doing that is the Platinum plan. We've got a weekly rate of $29.95, get you access to every sport that we cover. We've got different packages for individual sports. If you're only playing NBA, you're only playing baseball, great. If you're playing more than one sport, this is the best value in DFS. Awesemo.com, Platinum Plus plan, weekly package, $29.95, all in, gets you access to everything. Stop guessing, start winning. Hit that like and subscribe, guys. Make sure you get in Slack if you're a member. Make sure you get in Slack if you sign up for the site after that great promo read. Hit us up with an avatar. If you guys win a contest or come in the top 3 in a contest with more than 5,000 people on your favorite DFS site, and you're using our logo as your avatar on that site, send a screenshot of that to Awesemo Hall of Fame. That's Awesemo, HOF, Hall of Fame, at your favorite Twitter. I think it's on Twitter only. So on Twitter, right? Or send it into me by email at the support address, and we'll make sure it gets to the right space, and we'll tweet it out and use it the way we need to. But what that's going to get you guys, if you finished in that qualifier, gets you a free month of Platinum. You're eligible to win once a year. So go out there, rock the avatar. When you win, when you come in the top 3, send us a screenshot. We'll set you up with a free month of Platinum. Moving on, we've got the Arizona Diamondbacks. Plus 153 dogs with a 3.53 implied total coming into Cincinnati. The Reds are a minus 167 favorite with a 4.56 implied total. We've got Merrill Kelly taking on my apparently favorite pitcher in baseball right now, Tyler Mahle. I think this is going to be the spot where we see Mahle make his stand. I like the matchup for him, even though the Diamondbacks don't strike out a ton. Like I mentioned, he was one of my leading choices until I saw the ownership. So that's where I draw my concerns, is getting the ownership on him. Is it a place where we're willing to eat some chalk and go to Molly? The 40-some-odd percent FanDuel ownership is frightening. Alex, what are you thinking about Tyler Mahle on this spot against a somewhat weak Diamondbacks lineup?
Yeah, I think Mahle is probably the best pitcher of the slate here. His strikeouts this year so far have been off the meter with 39%. So at that point, I'm like, okay, this is really high. I got to check these numbers a little bit. So then I go down to the swinging strike. It is down a little bit from 14% to 12% this year. So I don't think that we can really expect him to be quite that good. But his number last year was 30%. So I'm having a tough time figuring this out because it's like saying maybe the strikeout should go down, but then the number have gone up so far. But regardless, anywhere in that region is going to look pretty strong today.
Max, you agree on that? I've talked about Mahle a lot. People are sick of me hearing me talk about his spin rate. So take us through your Mahle thoughts.
So yeah, my thought was exactly Alex's. Like I saw that K rate and I was like, this can't be right. So then I went to the swinging strikes, and he is getting a little bit lucky with the strikeouts. The thing that I like is he's giving up like no hard contact. He's only given up 2 barrels all year in 3 starts. That's excellent. When you look at his batted ball stuff, it's just a ton of weak fly balls, and his xFIP is around 3, which is great. I mean, I hate to say this, but he's the safest pitcher today. He also has upside, but I don't know if he has as much upside like a guy like Anderson, who's swinging miss stuff is a little bit better. If I could talk, it would be great. So my thoughts are that he's definitely a great pitcher, but I think you can get a little bit of a leverage if you pivot away from him in some spots.
Yeah, and that is the biggest concern for me here. I think it's about the ownership and the leverage. So I'm really curious to just kind of see how it sorts out in my process. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time post-show to go through that the right way for me. But I expect to have a pretty good share of Mahle. I don't know if I'll quite reach the public. It'll be difficult to exceed the public mark in the mid-40s. I don't think he's like a lock kind of a play, but you mentioned I think he is probably the safest play. I think I agree with that. Safer than Ian Anderson going up against those Yankees in Yankee Stadium. Arizona this year striking out 24.5% of the time against righties. That's dead in the middle of the league, tied with the Yankees actually for 15th. But their WRC plus as a team, 14% below average, only a 152 team ISO against righties, hit 16 home runs in the split. So I can argue with it that it's a pretty good spot for him. I think that he's got some upside there, but again, we just get that, we run into that ownership buzz. So Merrill Kelly on the other side going up against what I think is a pretty good Reds lineup. Kelly only striking out 13.5% of hitters so far this season in his 16 innings, 1.69 whip, 4.75 xFIP. Alex, knowing what I know about you and strikeout rate, I'm imagining that's not really a pitcher who's going to be on the board for you against a pretty good Reds lineup, is it?
Well, I can see some potential here. It does look like the ownership, people are going to Merrill Kelly, which is a little surprising. The Reds lineup is a little bit on the weak side today, where just around the average on base and ISO. The strikeouts are a little bit higher than average. So all in all, like a pretty average matchup for Merrill Kelly. So again, I'm kind of like looking at this 14% number and trying to reconcile that with previous years. So the swinging strike rate, and I'm finding all this on Fangraphs, was 9.7% last year and it's 8.9% this year. So I'm expecting the strikeouts to not be down a ton. Last year he had 23%. Previous year he had 20%. So I expect him to fall in that low 20s, which makes him like playable today, given it's a small slate, and the over/under in this game is pretty low.
Makes sense. Max, are you going to any of the Cincinnati bats on the other side of that one against Merrill Kelly?
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite spots. The wind's blowing out here, and this stadium is really good for home runs. And Merrill Kelly, even though his strikeout should go up, like Alex said, he's giving up a ton of hard hits and barrels. I really like to target spots like that, especially with a low-owned red stack. where people are actually going to play Kelly. So you're getting like built-in leverage there. Yeah, and I just like these hitters. Like I think up and down the Reds lineup, even without Castellanos, which kind of sucks that he's suspended, this would have been a great spot for him versus a guy that really doesn't strike too many people out. I like this as a contrarian spot for the Reds.
Yeah, I like, basically 1 through 5 in the projected lineup that we're working with here. Jesse Winker. I feel the same about Jesse Winker as I do about Tyler Mahle. I love the hard contact that the kid makes. I think he's excellent. So I really like getting his lefty bat into my lineups. Tyler Naquin has had a good start to his season.
Yeah.
Eugenio Suarez, Joey Votto, and then Nick Senzel has had a pretty nice start to his season. He's a former tip-top prospect. So a kid I still expect to really round into a very good DFS player for us as the season rolls along. So I'll be getting to some red stacks there. Anybody interested in some contrarian Diamondback stacks? We talked about, they're a little bit lacking in the power department so far this year against righty pitching. Don't strike out like crazy, but there are some strikeouts there. Is anybody going to some stacks of these bats? And if so, who?
Sure. Yeah, I think the Diamondbacks, they look like a leverage stack on Fanduel, on Draftkings, not quite as much. The thing is, they are one of the lowest projected teams today with only 3.6 runs, so tied for the lowest. So I don't usually chase those teams because I feel like we can do better. And I noticed Cole Calhoun is batting second. He's garnering a lot of ownership because he's only 3K and batting second. So once you go down below him, all the guys are minus values in addition to not being a well-projected team. So I do think this might be the bottom of the barrel in the Diamondbacks.
Yeah, that was kind of my read on the Diamondbacks here, and I might throw a few just because I'll have probably a fair share of Tyler Mahle, so I might roll just a couple of them out there with what I think is another really good stack, and hopefully capture some variance if they blow up Mahle. But I don't expect that to be the outcome tonight, so it'll be limited. I think we can move on from that one. Max, did you have any extremely different thoughts on the Diamondbacks to share with us there?
I mean, I think I'm a little bit more on them just because of the way the slate is shaping up with one canceled game, one 7-inning game, and one game that has a bunch of rain built in. We just don't have as many options. And I think they're going to be so low owned because Mahle's going to be so high owned that you just have so much built-in leverage there. I'm not saying to play them in like single entry or 3-max, but I think they make for a stack that you should probably go over the field in a 150 lineup construction.
Makes some sense. It's worth some consideration for sure. And yeah, I mean, there are quality sticks, with Pavin Smith, Cole Calhoun, who Alex mentioned is drawing a lot of ownership, definitely power upside in Calhoun against any righty. Asdrubal Cabrera is a professional hitter. David Peralta, pretty professional hitter. Carson Kelly, Eduardo Escobar, a little bit of wild cards there. I don't like the two Knicks that they've got at the bottom of the projected, but yeah, 1 through 6, I think we can definitely work with there. So I think we can move on from that one. We've got Toronto Blue Jays at the Boston Red Sox. We talked about some rain in the forecast. We'll have Trent Thornton and a cast of thousands taking on Garrett Richards. Thornton should be opening. I think it's Anthony Kay to follow, but we're not entirely sure. Blue Jays plus 115 dogs, 4.56 implied total. Sox minus 125 favorites, 5.04 implied total. For me, I would be looking into the Boston bats here, really the bats on both sides of things. I don't really think much of Garrett Richards as a pitcher, but if I was going to a pitcher in this game, gun to my head, it would be him, which, I don't want to have to do. So talk to me about the bats in this one, Alex. Which one is your favorite side of bats and why?
I think they both look good. I mean, it's Fenway. The weather is going to be what we have to look out for here. I'm pulling up the radar right now just so I have a good idea. It looks like at 7 p.m. the future radar has all the rain washing out in this particular simulation. In dark sky, it's saying it's going to be raining all night. So I am really torn here what to do. But if the game plays, I think this is probably one of the best ones for bats because it is in Fenway, and you got two pitchers in Trent Thornton, who, as you're saying, probably doesn't go deep, but Garrett Richards, neither of those guys are particularly good. So this is a good opportunity for bats.
Any favorite bats from either side that you would be really, trying to go out of your way for, Alex?
Draftkings is doing something interesting this year where they're really pricing up like the best hitters in the lineup. So JD Martinez is 6,100 on Draftkings and 4,400 on Fanduel, and Vlad Guerrero is 5,700 on Draftkings. Like, I'm kind of wondering if that will like maybe shake some of the ownership off them. But I think none of the bats look amazing individually except Lourdes, Gurriel for Toronto, and Tellez batting 6 and 7. Gurriel and Tellez both have had rough starts to the year with only in the low 20s on base and no power, but BABIP is low as well, and the hitting, maybe they've gotten a little bit of bad luck on their side. So I'm not ready to give up hope yet.
Yeah, and a couple guys with proven power. Tellez on the correct side of his splits, only 2,200 for Lourdes Gurriel on FanDuel, 2,100 for Tellez, 3,000 for Tellez on DK. So yeah, I think that's definitely a spot we can exploit. Max, talk to me about the hated Red Sox, my friend. What are we looking at as Yankee fans on this team? Are we going to Red Sox stacks? I think there's a lot to like in the middle of that lineup.
Yeah, K is actually like a decent pitcher, but we saw what the Red Sox can do yesterday against Ryu, who's actually a really good pitcher. Yeah. These guys are such good hitters. It doesn't really matter what the matchup is. They are priced up, but like Alex said, this is the best spot for bats on the whole slate. And the slate's so short that, unless we see a total washout, I feel like we almost have to take some shots here no matter what. I kind of like the Toronto side a little bit more just because I feel like they're going to be a little bit more contrarian with the bats down in the order. And Garrett Richards has actually run really good so far this year. His xFIP's been in the 5s, but he hasn't given up too many barrels yet. I feel like those are coming. And I'm kind of like a Rowdy Tellez truther. I really feel like 3K is just too cheap for his power upside. Gurriel is too good a hitter to be hitting the way he's been. Yeah. So I really like him too. I just love Bo Bichette through Rowdy Tellez here. I feel like that makes for a really nice stack against Garrett Richards, especially as the road team at Fenway. I always like the road team in Fenway. You can also go to the Red Sox, obviously. They're a little bit priced up, but JD, Bogarts, they just smash lefties, and that's what they're going to get out of K. So
any concern after the switch over with the lefties in that lineup, Verdugo and Devers in particular? Any concern about those two when they start to face the lefty?
Devers has a ton of hard hits versus lefties, so I'm not that concerned. Definitely hits for a lower average and strikes out more. At 5.6K, it's I don't know. I think he's going to be very contrarian. So I like Verdugo more just because he makes more contact and he's cheaper. But yeah, if you're going to make a stack, it's hard to leave bat like Devers out just because he has so much upside.
Yeah, one of the best bats on the team, one of the better bats at the hot corner in the entire league. We got to move on from that one, though, guys. We're running a little short on time. So we've got, I mentioned at the top of the show, OddsShopper.com. One of the biggest possible edges that you can find in sports betting is shopping to find the best line. Seems simple. Betting lines change by the minute. They vary greatly wherever book you're using. So it makes sense to lay them all out, look side by side in real time, and find the best prices, the best sites to make your bets. Shop your odds around. That's why it's important to use Awesemo's OddsShopper. Helps you find those lines. Every line on any kind of bet you're looking to make, all updated in real time, whether you're looking to make prop bets, whether you're looking to just bet the game totals, the over-unders, anything you're looking for, team futures, all updated in real time on our dashboard. Shop the odds, stop guessing, start winning. OddsShopper.com. Moving on, guys. New York Mets taking on the Chicago Cubbies in freezing cold Chicago. Mets minus 126 favorites on the road, 3.98 implied total. Cubbies plus 116 dogs at home, 3.59 implied total. Cubs have Zach Davies defending the hill at home with David Peterson going for the Mets. I liked Peterson the last time he went, and he had a nice little start. I'm not sure if I'm really seeing it the same way here for him. I was getting to some Mets, wrote them up in the article this afternoon. I think they're getting a little bit underrated here. It's terrible, terrible conditions for baseball. But I think the matchup against Davies, getting the Mets on the road, I think it's a decent spot for them. And they're very affordable, particularly on FanDuel. This is a team that is just priced way down. Some of their better hitters have struggled to start the year, so I think maybe that's why. But at that ownership and those prices, even in the cold, I'm willing to roll some Met stacks against Zach Davies here. Am I totally crazy, Alex? Or are you seeing that kind of the same way?
No, I think it's solid. The Mets, it is only 42 degrees right now in Chicago. So very cold, but they have a team total of 4.2, which is it's higher than a couple other teams on the slate, so it's not that bad. And then Zach Davies really isn't anything to be worried about. He might have had a good xFIP last year of 3.6, but strikeout rate was only 17%. This year, like both of those numbers are looking even worse so far. So I think this is a decent spot to target the Mets.
Yeah, that was a stack for me. I was looking at it, almost top to bottom. It depends on who's actually in the confirmed lineup, but getting James McCann down the bottom of the lineup, one of the better hitting catchers in baseball when you have to roster a catcher, I think he makes a lot of sense, even sacrificing a plate appearance against maybe a worse catcher who would be hitting higher up. And then, yeah, McNeil, Conforto, JD Davis, the top end of the lineup that are obvious names. I think there's plenty to love there. Max, are you getting to any David Peterson against these Chicago Cubs, or are you going with any Cubs bats going the other way?
David Peterson made me look silly last time. I know you were on him, and I wanted to stack, what was it, Philly, I think, and made me look very, very bad. I mean, he looked lights out. The fastball was like 95, 96. I don't know where this guy is getting all this velocity from all of a sudden. But yeah, I mean, 7.1K, I think he's projected to be really highly owned. Yeah, 35%. I don't know if I love him at that ownership, but he's definitely too cheap for the upside that he provides. I mean, this Cubbies lineup doesn't strike out as much versus lefties as it does righties, just because they have Matt Duffy, Marisnik, and Boat down in the bottom of the lineup. But I don't know. I'm not that concerned. At 7.1K, you don't need too much. The ownership is scary. That's about it. But I'm not on these Cubs bats going the other way.
Yeah, not as much for me either. It's tempered enthusiasm for me about Peterson this time around. I don't think he's probably not the 35% strikeout guy that we've seen so far this year, but maybe somewhere in between that and like the 20% rate he had last year is where he settles. But 8,500 might be a little high for him on FanDuel. We'll see what happens in this start, but I won't be getting too many Cubs bats either. We've got to move on to the next game. Before we do, just real quick, Alex, anything for you for the Cubs side of things from the bats?
I'll mention, I'm more interested in Peterson. His swinging strike rate this year, which of course we're using to get a little bit bigger of a sample because he's only throwing the 42 batters. It's up to 13%. So it's one of the higher marks in the slate. I mean, in some ways it's kind of just explaining, like if someone has 35% strikeouts, they're going to have a high swinging strike rate. It's almost like reverse logic to some extent, but a little bigger sample where it's very solid. He looks like a really good play on Draftkings where we need two pitchers at 7,100. So I'm definitely going to be targeting him.
I like it. Sounds like we're all on board the Peterson train tonight, so that makes sense. And cue the Cubs onslaught then. So moving on, we've got Tampa Bay Rays at the Kansas City Royals. It's basically a pick 'em in Vegas. 4.05 implied total for the Rays, 4.03 implied total for the Royals. Michael Wacha taking on Jacob Junis in a matchup of two pitchers who are not all that good, in my opinion. Max, you seeing the pitchers any way, or is this a spot for bats?
I love the pitchers, both of them, really.
Really?
Wacha just looks awesome now. Tampa kind of knows how to take a pitcher and turn him from garbage into something really good. He has a 17% swinging strike rate this year. No, 17% ownership only, and his swinging strike percentage is really good. So it's like taking him over Peterson is my play here, just because the ownership is so much less. His xFIP is 3 so far this year, which is excellent. And I know we really like this new lineup that Kansas City's thrown out, but I really like Wacha just going up against this lineup with the way that Tampa is having him pitch, just trying to get as much strikeouts as possible by throwing his off-speed stuff more. which is the way to go for these pitchers to really up their swinging strikes now. His price is awesome, is only around the same price as Peterson. So yeah, I really like Waka in the spot. And just talking about Junis as well, he scrapped the changeup, which was really getting him in trouble last year, in favor of a cutter, and he's throwing his cutter a lot more, which has really been good at lowering his xFIP. His xFIP is down to like really manageable levels. Tampa strikes out a ton, so you can really up the strikeout percentage that he's shown so far this year. Like his swinging strike percentage doesn't support his K rate, which we really don't like. But against Tampa, I don't think it matters that much. I really like both pitchers here.
All right. We're in different spots, but I'm going to take that advice to heart when I build my lineup. So I'm going to consider that a little bit more. Alex, are you seeing that the same way, or are you preferring bats? And if so, which bats? Take us wherever you want.
Yeah, Junis. I think he looks solid. It looks like there might be some rationale to his strikeouts being up this year, because I see his swinging strike rate is 12%. Last year was at 9%.
Yeah.
So I think that's encouraging enough. And it looks like he's very low owned. So I think you can get some leverage with Junis. And then Waka, I'm a little bit confused by, because like I remember for a few years he wasn't very good, but so far this year he's been excellent. He has a 16% swinging strike rate over his first few games, which is up a ton from 11% last year. And that helps explain how he's struck out more than 30% of batters this year. It's a little bit hard to comprehend, but that is one metric that makes me feel encouraged that maybe he can keep it up.
It is a guy we were waiting on for years, so it wouldn't totally shock me if Tampa did spot something and fix it. They have done that before, like Max said, so that could make some sense. Interesting. I'll be getting to some shares of stacks on both sides of this one in small degrees. I do like both teams, both lineups, and some power on the Tampa Bay side of things. We're running out of time, though, guys, or we're out of time, basically. So why don't we jump into some home run picks here before we hit the bricks? Alex, who's your home run pick?
All right. I'll since I'm not going to be playing bats from this Pittsburgh-Detroit game, maybe I'll take a home run pick from the game instead. So I think maybe Jonathan Scope. He's going up against Mitch Keller, so not a pitcher we're worried about. He's not going to pop in DFS because of the 7-inning game, but he's had a really slow start to the season with 0 extra base hits over 54 plate appearances. That means he's due.
If you didn't say it, I was gonna. Yeah, excellent hitter over his career, righty though. So I like that one. Max, who's your home run pick?
So I better do better than yesterday when I picked the guy that didn't end up being in the lineup. So it's got to be better this time around. I'm going to pick Eugenio Suarez versus Merrill Kelly.
I like that one a lot. That was my pick from the Reds. And let's see, my pick in my column was Ozzie Albies from the Atlanta Braves going up against my New York Yankees. So we'll stick with that one. Guys, we really appreciate everybody hanging out. We went a little bit over time there, so hit the like, hit the subscribe for us down the bottom of the screen. Stick around. We've got NBA shows coming up next. Tip-off show with Kayla, Spags, and Eric into Deeper Dive with Lofty and Adam, and Live Before Lock with Josh and Greg. Should be a good one. Like and subscribe, guys. Those are coming up next. We'll see you later.